Chapter 936. Now, Sun Wen and Jiang Pengji were two grasshoppers on the same rope. He would only be happy if the other party was happy. Putting all this aside, the tribes of the north borderline were still tribes after all. If they were allowed to enter the Central Plains, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering, and the Han people would not be able to protect them. Although there were people like Wu Liba who advocated Han literature in the north borderline, he was a minority. Most tribes in the north borderline were aggressive and destructive. Their destruction of civilization was far greater than their protection and development. Even Wu Liba only learned Han culture to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the Central Plains. He tried to use Han culture to invade the Central Plains and occupy the fertile land. The history books had already given the answer to the consequences of letting the tribes of the north borderline invade the Central Plains. Let's not talk about the past, let's talk about the recent history. The four factions of Nanman and the three tribes of the north borderline were all different tribes. After the former conquered Nanxing, not even a blade of grass grew. They slaughtered savagely, looted unreasonably, killed, humiliated, and committed all sorts of crimes. The bloody invasion had already aroused resistance and disgust from the Han people of the Central Plains. The four factions of Nanman were a lesson that must not be repeated in Dongqing. Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, hiding the glint in his eyes and his deep thoughts. Wei Ci told him what to do next, but did not tell him the detailed steps. He still had to plan everything himself. The king of the north borderline has 9 sons. Which one should I choose? It was not difficult to choose. The difficult part was to make the 9 princes fight evenly and ensure that they split the north borderline into several pieces. The eldest prince lost his mother at a young age. Although he is the eldest son, he is violent and licentious. He even has the hobby of beating Han slaves to death for fun. Sun Wen wrote the word big on the expensive Xian paper and quickly drew a cross above the word big. If he encouraged Haruncha to assist the eldest prince, he would not do so even if he was a fool. After all, the eldest prince was a pile of mud that could not be helped. Although he was wise and far-sighted when he was young, he had been too stupid in recent years. The second prince is brave and good at fighting, but his mother's tribe is too powerful. If he assists him, I'm afraid it will backfire. It's not appropriate. Sun Wen wrote the word second again, roughly listing the second prince's strengths and weaknesses, then crossed it out without hesitation. The third prince is quite close to Wu Liba, even shamelessly acknowledging him as his teacher and learning Han culture from him. Sun Wen pondered for a while. He had seen the third prince from afar. He looked gentle, but there was no lack of ambition between his brows. If he assisted this fellow, wouldn't he create a second troublesome Wu Liba and make things more difficult for his lord? Therefore, this fellow was also inappropriate. The fourth prince was born to a female slave. His status was low and his bloodline was inferior. However, he was adopted by the queen of the northern borderline who was unable to conceive him. His mother's family was powerful. However, the empress's sister had given birth to the sixth prince, so the fourth prince would definitely be a stepping stone for the sixth prince. This could be considered. At the very least, he could instigate a fight between him and the sixth prince. We can think about it later. Sun Wen rejected 3 princes in a row, but he was barely interested in the fourth prince. He continued to count down. The fifth prince and the third prince were biological brothers, but the 2 brothers were obviously not of one mind and were hindering each other behind their backs. The sixth prince was the son of the current empress's younger sister, and his status was the most distinguished among the 9 princes. In other words, apart from the second prince who held the military power, the sixth prince was the most likely to compete for the king of the northern borderline. The seventh prince was very close to the northern borderline trading company. Because of his mother's tribe, he had a lot of dividends in the trading company and earned a lot of money. The seventh prince was not a concern, because this fellow was very close to the 8th prince and the 9th prince. Although they were not biological brothers, the 7th prince treated the 8th prince wholeheartedly. If he wanted money, he would give money, and if he wanted people, he would give them. At present, it seemed that these 2 princes could be divided into the same camp. As for the 9th prince, he and the 4th prince had the same mother, but he was not adopted by the empress, so his status was very low. Sun Wen simply analyzed the situation of the 9 princes under the king of the northern borderline, and a general plan had already appeared in his mind. To be on the safe side, he planned to use a scheme within a scheme. On the surface, he supported the 4th prince, but behind the 9th prince,
He would use the fourth prince to get rid of the other princes one by one, and then use the ninth prince to get rid of the fourth prince.
As for how to get rid of the northern borderline princes, he needed to think carefully. It was best to kill several birds with one stone. He would not directly kill a few northern borderline princes, but he could further stimulate the conflict between them and the king of the northern borderline. At that time, then there will be a good show to watch. Sun Wen's face was expressionless. He placed the expensive but already ruined rice paper on the candle and burned it, erasing all traces. Wei Zixiao, oh Wei Zixiao. You must remember your promise. Only then can you live up to this old man's plan. Sun Wen's entry into the industry was a little awkward.
If it had been earlier, he and his lord would have been able to nurture a friendship in times of adversity.
If it was a little later, it would be the icing on the cake. Even if he couldn't make it to the top, Sun Wen didn't have much ambition. All he wanted was a place to stay. It just had to be at this time of year. The lord was preparing for battle in the north borderline. Although the chances of winning the former were quite high, it wasn't 100%. What if he lost? His grandson was still in Wanzhou. Sun Wen couldn't afford to gamble. Therefore, he could only do his best and risk his life to help Jiang Pengji. The image of his grandson's young and adorable face appeared in Sun Wen's mind. His cold and hard heart softened a little, but it soon became even harder and colder. Bei Jiang must die. While Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the north borderline, Jiang Pengji and the others were eating melons in the military tent. She was not eating watermelon. She was roasting sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. Where has Uncle Gu been doing business all these years? Jiang Pengji followed the instructions of the viewers in the streaming room and threw the sweet potatoes into the fire. At the same time, she turned her head to ask Gu Xian, whose face was full of vicissitudes. Gu Xian traveled north and south to do business. He often only replied to a letter once every 6 months. Jiang Pengji had no idea where he had gone. Gu Xian smiled and said, he went to Beiyuan, Xichang, and Shalan. The sweet potatoes were discovered at the border of Xichang, and the sweet potatoes were taken from Shalan. I asked the locals for advice and brought their seedlings all the way back with great difficulty. I just want you to have a taste. Wei Ci was silent and didn't speak. In his previous life, when the Zhang dynasty was established, the country was strong and prosperous. In order to please the emperor, the surrounding small countries always brought all kinds of things from their own countries. The officials of the Zhang dynasty didn't want to be outdone. The sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were presented at that time. However, these two small things almost caused a bloody massacre. Sweet potatoes were grown at the border of Xichang. The locals chopped them up and fed them to pigs. No one had personally tasted them. In the eyes of the locals, they were not food for humans at all. They were only fit to be fed to livestock. In Shalan, sweet potatoes were also eaten by the poor. They were lowly food in the wild. Yet these two lowly foods were served to the emperor's table as dishes for a state banquet. After she ate a few mouthfuls with relish, someone actually stood up and pointed out the truth. To this day, Wei Ci could still remember the silence in the hall. Everyone was sweating and trembling all over. Who served the emperor's table food that only domestic pigs and untouchables ate? Chapter 937. Aren't you going to eat? I think it's quite delicious and tastes good. For the people, food that can fill their stomachs is good food.
The so-called lowly or elegant is something that only rich second generations who are born with wealth and do not know hunger or poverty pay attention to.
Not only did Her Majesty's appetite increase, she ate 2 portions and asked the royal chef to prepare one for the crown princess, Jiang Yan. Wei Ci remembered clearly that Her Majesty's body was getting weaker as she grew older. It was rare for her to have such a good appetite. The world is peaceful now, but I, Yen'er, cannot forget the sufferings my ancestors suffered in this chaotic world. I must always be grateful and put the people's livelihood in the first place. Only then will I not let down the blood and sacrifice of my ancestors. There is no distinction between high and low food. Are you saying that if I throw all the delicacies at the state banquet to the pigs in the pigsty, they are lowly food and not worthy of being eaten by all of you here? With just a few words, she not only smoothed out the malicious humiliation, but also showed her love for the people. At the same time, she handled it gently and avoided a bloody massacre. If she didn't say that, anyone who handled sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes, regardless of whether they were foreign ministers, servants, royal chefs or officials of the dynasty, could easily be accused of a groundless crime and could not escape the death penalty. If the purge was carried out, at least 2,000 lives would be lost. The majesty of the emperor could not be challenged by anyone. Her Majesty chose to handle it gently, and even generously accepted sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. She ordered the royal chefs to use these two foods as ingredients to research various dishes.
When they were accepted by the people, they were promoted to the whole country.
Who could have imagined that these two things could be so prolific? Because of them, the Jiang dynasty did not have a large-scale food shortage. After being reborn and seeing these two little things again, Xueqi's heart was filled with emotions. Before he could come back to his senses, he heard Xueqi's words. However, they are not popular locally. People won't eat them unless they are extremely hungry. They are usually fed to domestic pigs. Jiang Pengji's expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, "They taste good. It's good that they are edible." Xueqi's expression became gentler and the smile on his lips became wider.
Her Majesty was indeed the emperor.
No matter when she was, her pure and innocent nature had never changed. Xueqi smiled bitterly. Little Master is still so open-minded.
This old servant hasn't finished speaking.
Jiang Pengji was drooling over the taste of the roasted sweet potatoes that the audience was talking about. She asked, "Is there anything else you want to say?"
This old servant naturally has a reason for bringing them back. If it wasn't for this old servant wouldn't have dared to send such unpresentable food to Little Master.
Xueqi's way of thinking was still very conservative. Humans shouldn't fight over food with animals. It would be shameful to say it out loud. "Uncle Gu, I'm listening." Xueqi said carefully, "They have a high yield and are easy to grow. They are not afraid of drought, and people can eat them to fill their stomachs. They are suitable for farmers."
However, this old servant carefully inquired about it.
According to the old farmer, eating them together with a few kinds of food will counteract each other. In serious cases, it can even cause death, so it's better to be cautious. For example, persimmons, eggs, river crabs, and so on. If it's light, it can cause unbearable abdominal pain. If it's serious, it can cause the intestines to rot. Jiang Pengji said, "Uncle Gu is really meticulous. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have noticed it." Xueqi smiled, "Little boss is too humble." By the time they finished talking, the sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were almost cooked. Jiang Pengji found a stick and prodded them out of the fire. "Hot, hot, hot." Her fingertips were scalded, and she raised her hand to pinch her ear. Only then did she feel better. When she peeled off the scorched surface and revealed the golden and fragrant melon flesh, she salivated even faster. She divided the roasted sweet potatoes into several portions and sent someone to deliver them to Fengzhen and Qiguanrang. The remaining portion was divided among the three of them in the tent. "Uncle Gu, you're getting old. Why don't you settle down and stop personally running around for business?" Jiang Pengji sighed. Xueqi traveled north and south for business. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered danger. There were a few times when he almost lost all his belongings. He thought about the current situation of the 5 countries in the Central Plains and had no choice but to nod in agreement. He was old, and it was time for him to stop and retire. Jiang Pengji said, "I'll take care of you when you're old." This old servant also has filial sons and daughters. "Little boss, you can't deprive them of their desire to be filial to their father."
Xueqi laughed heartily, his eyes full of sincerity.
"This old servant has no regrets in this life to be able to hear you say this."
"No, there is one thing."
"What is it?" "Little boss, you're already 19 years old. When spring comes, you'll be 20.
Forgive this old servant for overstepping his bounds, but you should also consider your own affairs."
His little boss was definitely the best. No man in the world was worthy of her. However, if the little boss didn't get married, how would she have children? If she didn't have any descendants, Xueqi wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he closed his eyes. "This matter isn't urgent." Jiang Pengji smiled. "Didn't I previously stipulate that female soldiers in the female battalion can only be discharged and married at the age of 25? I'm their lord. Every word and action is their role model. As their lord, I can't take the lead in breaking the rules. It's still early." Jiang Pengji's tone left no room for doubt. Xueqi could only give up. The sky gradually darkened. Xueqi got up and bade farewell. Jiang Pengji sent Xueqi off and said to Wei Xiai, "Zixiao, did you hear what Uncle Gu said just now?" Wei Xiai pursed his lips and didn't say a word. "Sai, it's not that I don't want to. It's obvious that she's unwilling to agree. I can only delay it as long as I can." "Lord." Wei Xiai couldn't help but speak. "If you don't want me to talk nonsense, why don't you quickly submit?" Wei Xiai took a deep breath and hurriedly bowed before retreating. He was traumatized by never submitting. He would be safe if he left early. Jiang Pengji stood on the spot and shrugged at the audience in the streaming room. "Streamer V, look, you scared people away by playing straight. It's better to cook slowly." The audience's greatest joy now was to watch Jiang Pengji conquer the world, chase after Wei Xiai, and trick her subordinates.
The progress of the former and the latter had been climbing forward.
Only the middle one had a long way to go. Isha Jixing, my heart aches for the streamer. What kind of strategy and difficulty are you facing?
Hell mode is nothing more than this, right? Wither into dust. My heart aches too. To the streamer, the difficulty of conquering Beauty CI seems to be more difficult than conquering the world.
My heart hurts, buddy. Jiang Pengji stationed troops at the border of Chongzhou and trained them every day to intimidate the northern borderline.
The atmosphere became more and more solemn.
There was a feeling that a war was about to break out. Sun Wen lived up to his previous bragging. He played the political situation of the northern borderline in the palm of his hand. Following the incident of hunting deer and partridge dying of illness, the conflict between the 9 princes and the king of the northern borderline completely surfaced. The northern borderline had the habit of autumn hunting to maintain their bloodthirstiness. Deeply influenced by the Han family's pursuit of deer, the king of the northern borderline also advocated hunting deer to show his supreme status in the northern borderline. In this year's autumn hunt, the deer was killed by the eldest prince. However, the arrow that killed the deer belonged to the second prince. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that his beard was about to fly off. He investigated and scolded his 2 sons, but in the end, he found out that the third prince was the culprit. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. You and Wu Liba learned the Han culture well, but you actually used it on your own brother.
Beside him, the 4th prince's eyes flashed with a shrewd light.
Chapter 938. This year's autumn hunt was destined to be an eventful one. First, hunting deer dragged the first prince, second prince and third prince into the water.
Following that, Partridge died of illness dragged the rest of the princes into the water.
Partridge was the most revered divine eagle by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, and was also the totem symbol of the northern borderline royal family. 7th prince obtained a very majestic partridge from the trading company. He liked it very much, but in the end, he reluctantly gave it to his favorite 8th prince. 8th prince was naturally attracted by the partridge, but when he thought of the king of the northern borderline's violent and suspicious nature, how would he dare to keep such a good partridge in his hands? He and 7th prince discussed and prepared to present the partridge during the autumn hunt. If they could gain the approval of the king of the northern borderline during the autumn hunt, their status in the imperial court would rise. To maintain the partridge in its most perfect state, they spent a lot of effort. The day before the offering, 7th prince and 8th prince even personally went to see the partridge, and its condition was very good. Unexpectedly, the partridge died of illness. 8th prince and 7th prince presented the partridge together, and when everyone carried it up, they found out that the partridge was already on its last breath and did not have long to live. The smile on the king of the northern borderline's face froze, and immediately turned into anger. He stood up and pulled out a knife from the rack, and acted like he was going to hack his 2 sons to death. The king of the northern borderline felt that his body was weak, and was unable to satisfy his harem. That's why he consumed Hanshi powder to regain his former glory. He also firmly believed that Hanshi powder could prolong his life, and preserve his glory forever. If it wasn't because he was old and weak, which man would like to consume tiger and wolf medicine? But now,
his 2 good sons praised him as the king of partridge of the northern borderline, and then turned around to present him a partridge that was dying of illness. The king of the northern borderline was the overlord of the northern borderline, and a ruthless character. For power and status, he stepped on the corpses of his brothers and father, and led the northern borderline from a weak state to a strong state. To him, status and power were the most important.
If his sons wanted to touch him, he would kill them.
In such a short period of time, The king of the northern borderline was enraged, and the fingers on his right hand trembled uncontrollably. He thought that he would kill his two sons on the spot, but unexpectedly, his eyes rolled back and he fainted from anger. When the king of the northern borderline woke up, his anger was not as strong as before.
Investigate. Investigate clearly for this solitude just who is playing tricks behind the scenes. No matter how stupid the 7th and 8th princes were, they wouldn't dare to give him a dying gonging and curse him in public. The only possibility was that the two of them had been schemed against. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't checked, but the moment he did, he was shocked. Many princes were involved in this, but the circumstances varied. Some were intentional, while others were unintentional. Now, all 9 of his sons were reprimanded by the king of the northern borderline. The 4th prince knelt for 2 whole days before he was released. He went back to pack up, burned some incense, and took a bath. Then he solemnly and secretly met with Sun Wen. "Mr. is an extraordinary talent. Please accept this humble king's bow." The 4th prince did not like the Han culture, but he was good at pretending and observing people's expressions. He could often poke at the itch of others and win their favor. "4th prince, you don't have to do this. One is just acting on my master's orders." Sun Wen dodged and raised his hand to help the 4th prince, who was still bowing to the ground, up. After the 4th prince heard this, a fierce look flashed across his eyes. He admired Sun Wen because Sun Wen only had brains but no power, and he could control him. However, the 4th prince hated Herentia very much, and even wanted him to die. Because Herentia was an important minister of the northern borderline, but now he was toying with the prince of the northern borderline. When he inherited the throne of the northern borderline, the 4th prince would put him in an important position, but Sun Wen would not tolerate Herentia. This was also Sun Wen's goal. He wanted to use the 4th prince to eliminate the other princes, and then provoke the conflict between the 4th prince and Herentia. Before the 4th prince's power grew, he would first urge Herentia and the 9th prince to join forces and get rid of the 4th prince. In the end, only Herentia and the 9th prince were left. When the time came, Sun Wen had other arrangements. He would ensure that the northern borderline's royal family would be completely extinct. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's old face raised a somewhat detached smile, just in time to meet the situation. "This time, thank you for your guidance, mister. But this humble king does not understand one thing." The 4th prince secretly rubbed his knees. Bursts of pain spread throughout his body, making it impossible for him to kneel, so he could only sit on a small stool. Sun Wen asked, "4th prince, please speak." The 4th prince said, "Mister, you have the talent to rule the world. You can remove this humble king from this matter. Why make this humble king suffer like this?" After kneeling for 2 days and 2 nights, not to mention his knees, just holding in his urine for 2 days made him extremely uncomfortable. Self-degradation is also a form of self-protection. Sun Wen smiled. "You should learn this from your eldest brother. If everyone is involved, and only you are aloof, won't the target be too obvious? At that time, you will become the target of public criticism. Therefore you can only suffer." The 4th prince sighed inwardly. It was not that he did not know this, but he could not blame Sun Wen for not doing a good job. "You mean, eldest brother used self-degradation to protect himself?" The 4th prince's eyes widened in surprise. The Han family pays particular attention to the eldest son. The 1st prince's biological mother is the first wife of the king. He is both the eldest son and the eldest son. Not only is he the oldest, but he has also been running his forces for the longest time. His mother's family is low-key and has not declined. Although the Han family's rules are not popular in the northern borderline, there are still important ministers in the court who like to follow this rule. At this time, the 1st prince is the target of public criticism. If he performs slightly better, not to mention the other princes, even the king will not tolerate him. In order to protect himself and plan for the future, he can only pollute himself and retreat in order to advance. The 4th prince did not agree, but Sun Wen's words were clear and logical, so he had to believe him. He remembered that the 1st prince was indeed outstanding when he was young. "Thank you for your guidance, sir." In this case, he had to be wary of this eldest brother. The 4th prince consulted Sun Wen for an hour, as if he had obtained a treasure. Little did he know that Sun Wen, who was scheming for him, was a 4-way spy. He was truly loyal to Lu Shi. On the surface, he submitted to Herentia, but he secretly hooked up with the 4th prince. Deeper down, he was in cahoots with the ninth prince. How could he not be talented if he could have a foot in 4 boats with ease?
When the atmosphere was almost ready, the two of them talked from the internal affairs of the northern borderline to the border.
Speaking of the border, they had to mention the Lu family of Chongzhou, who was like a fishbone stuck in the throat of the northern borderline. After Lu Shi left, Lu Shi, who was even more difficult to deal with, came. The northern borderline must have offended the Tai Sui these few years. The fourth prince snorted and said contemptuously, "I wonder what color Lu Shi's woman is," Sunwen said. "It doesn't matter whether she is good-looking or not. What matters is that she has troops and power in her hands." The fourth prince glanced at Sunwen and said, "Sir, you don't understand." "Don't understand what?" Sunwen asked, amused. The fourth prince confided in Sunwen and even joked from time to time.
He said meaningfully, "For a man, there is nothing more interesting than conquering a woman who is difficult to conquer."
The more difficult it was to conquer, the more enjoyable it was. Sunwen said calmly, "Oh." He understood what the fourth prince meant, but at the same time, he felt a bit of disdain. Chapter 939. Sunwen despised the fourth prince in his heart, but his expression remained calm and composed. It was as if he would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. The fourth prince seemed to have realized that he should not speak in front of Sunwen and leave a frivolous impression, so he quickly changed the topic. However, Sunwen controlled the tempo and successfully led the topic to the border. "Master Sun, in your opinion, how should we deal with the Lu family of Chongzhou?" The fourth prince coveted Jiang Pengji, but he wanted to use his male identity to gain a sense of superiority and boost his confidence. Returning to reality, he was only the son of a female slave. He had no right to speak to Jiang Pengji as an equal. Sunwen raised his eyelids and said calmly, "Does the fourth prince think that the most important thing now is to deal with the Lu family?" The fourth prince's expression froze, and he looked puzzled. "The Lu family has stationed troops at the border and looks like they're going to attack. Isn't that enough? Or do you think that we should first deal with internal strife?" The fourth prince asked in a subtle manner. Was it more important to deal with Lu Shi or to get rid of his brother who was competing with him? Sunwen smiled and asked the fourth prince, "If the Lu family sends troops now, how will the northern borderline respond?" The fourth prince was speechless. "She won't do that." Even if the northern borderline was a starving camel, it was still much bigger than a horse like Lu Shi. She was just a small duke, and she dared to attack the northern borderline? Who gave her the courage? Sunwen asked again, "What if the Lu family does?" The fourth prince said proudly, "If she dares to come, we'll accept her." Sunwen smiled coldly, and the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking arc. "Wrong. If the Lu family arrives, the northern borderline will be the one retreating." The fourth prince flew into a rage when he heard this. He was about to lose his temper when Sunwen said calmly, "A horse plague destroyed most of the northern borderline's military strength. Wu Liba offered a plan to buy the Mares from Cangzhou at a high price, hoping that the northern borderline would recover quickly. It's a good idea, but he forgot that buying the Mares at a high price gives the northern borderline a chance to be reborn, but it also puts them in an irrecoverable situation. As long as the feudal lords of the Central Plains realize that the northern borderline is strong on the outside but weak on the inside, they will gather their troops and have another Xueqi meeting. What will happen to the northern borderline then?" The fourth prince's face darkened instantly. Even though he was in the north borderline, he knew that the Xueqi meeting had gathered 23 feudal vassals of Dongqing, totaling more than 400,000 troops. Given the current situation in the north borderline, they really could not afford to offend them. As the prince of the northern borderline's royal family, the fourth prince knew the internal situation of the northern borderline best. Even though he kept telling himself that the cavalry of the northern borderline was invincible, after the horse plague, the cavalry had indeed been destroyed by 70 to 80%. Without their cavalry, the advantage that the northern borderline had over the Central Plains would be greatly reduced. In order to realize their ambition of conquering the Central Plains, the royal family of the northern borderline had put in a lot of effort for several years. Now that he was at a critical juncture of recovering his vitality, he could not afford to make any mistakes. If word gets out at this time... The fourth prince secretly clenched his fists. Lu Shi wouldn't dare to do that, and the other feudal vassals might not respond to her call. Sunwen poured a bucket of cold water on him. That's not necessarily true. There's an old saying in the Central Plains, those who are not of the same race are bound to have different intentions. The threat that the North borderline posed to Dongqing could be seen just by looking at the four factions of Nanman and Nanxing. In order not to follow in Nanqing's footsteps, there will definitely be feudal lords who will respond. The fourth prince's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He followed Sun Wen's train of thought, and the more he thought about it, the more he broke out in a cold sweat. Lu Shi was not a feudal lord who acted according to common sense. A few years ago, she had begun to station troops in Chongzhou, stocking up the fields and provisions, and was ready to fight. It was hard to say if this mad woman would risk her life to fight to the death with the northern borderline. Even though he was unwilling to admit it, the Han people did not lack madmen, nor did they lack the righteousness to sacrifice their lives for justice. With their pride and integrity, even if the northern borderline respected the Han culture, they still could not understand the foolish idea of sacrificing themselves for others. The fourth prince hurriedly asked, "Mr. Sun, you must teach me." Sun Wen smiled. Of course. He wore a smile on his face, but in his heart, he had cursed Wei Ci hundreds of times. Wei Ci was a lunatic who even exploited the labor of an old man to the limit. First, he had asked him to sow discord among the 9 princes of the northern borderline. He had worked hard and lost who knew how many brain cells, but he finally saw results. Before he had time to enjoy the fruits of victory, Wei Ci sent him another message. This time, the content was even more outrageous. He was asked to help Lu Shi recapture more than half of Xiongyu County, which had been occupied by the northern frontier for more than 20 years. When the northern frontier invaded, the entire Xiongyu County fell, and all 6 cities were lost. Although Master Yuan Jing went to the north borderline and took back 3 cities, there were still 3 cities in the north borderline's hands. If they couldn't even take back these 3 cities, how could they talk about reclaiming the northern border? When Jiang Pengji was worried, Wei Ci naturally tossed and turned restlessly in bed. As a result, this big hat was placed on Sun Wen's head. Go, Sun Zidao. Asterisk asterisk. Asterisk asterisk. One has a plan. We can sacrifice the rook to save the king, killing several birds with one stone. Sun Wen smiled meaningfully. Killing several birds with one stone? Fourth prince bowed deeply and said, "Please enlighten me, Mr. Sunday." After listening to Sun Wen's analysis, the fourth prince felt as if he had seen the sun. Chongzhou had many soldiers and generals, and every one of them was an elite. There was even a rumor that this batch of elite soldiers had been trained for more than 3 years. What did 3 years mean? Regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or the northern borderline, soldiers who had been carefully trained for 3 months could be considered elite soldiers. Soldiers who had been trained for more than 3 years, what should they be called? The Lu family of Chongzhou was indeed a troublesome enemy. If they were not eliminated, it would be difficult to rest easy. Fourth prince, you also know that it is not advisable to start a war in the northern borderline now, but we cannot let Chongzhou see any clues. Sun Wen's deep voice traveled into his ears, like a teacher of an academy teaching earnestly. The fourth prince subconsciously straightened his back and listened attentively. If that is the case, we might as well take another path and sacrifice the rook to save the king. Aren't the 3 cities of Chongzhou and Xiongyu County the best candidates to be discarded? After hearing this, the fourth prince felt a wave of displeasure. He looked at Sun Wen with a suspicious gaze. This Sun Wen before him was also a citizen of the Han family. Are you saying that we should abandon the 3 cities? Sun Wen acted as if he did not see the fourth prince's suspicion and wariness. He smiled mysteriously and said, "No." The fourth prince's heart sank. He pestered him and said, "Please don't tease me. Just say what you have to say." To the northern borderline, the 3 cities are not even of any value. The fourth prince interrupted him. "How dare you say that?" A murderous intent emerged in his heart. Sun Wen said, "I'm afraid the fourth prince doesn't know the situation in the 3 cities. The Han people have either escaped or died. At the very least, they have been captured and sold as slaves. The fertile fields are idle and no one cultivates them. The houses leak and no one repairs them. The city walls are deserted and no one guards them. Among the people in the city, how many Han people are doing business properly? To the northern borderline, how is such a place different from the slums? The 3 cities were already deserted and had no value. Even their strategic value was greatly reduced.
The once prosperous cities were now just places where the northern borderline's horse bandits or criminals hid. The northern borderline was the same as the southern barbarians. Their nature of destruction and plundering was far superior to governance. They would rob, kill, and plunder. The only thing they would not do was run properly.
Chapter 940.
Even so, the fourth prince still threatened him with a sentence. "Mr. Sun, aren't you afraid that I will punish you or even kill you for saying this in front of me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the fourth prince's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent, and the scimitar at his waist was already unsheathed.
Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid of death?
Although this old man is 46 this year, I haven't lived long enough.
Sun Wen was calm and composed.
He looked at Prince Roland with a faint smile, his eyes shining with wisdom and confidence. His eyes clearly conveyed a message. He was not afraid. He was not afraid of the threat of death from Prince Roland. He did not even think that Prince Roland would really punish him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. The fourth prince gasped for breath, with beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. He raised his hand and sheathed his scimitar.
Forget it. If Mr. Sun has anything to say, just say it. I will listen.
After saying that, he sat back down unwillingly. How could the fourth prince be a match for Sun when it came to scheming? In terms of mental fortitude, Sun Wen had attained the transcendent realm of being able to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him. In the end, Sun Wen won, completely dispelling the fourth prince's suspicions. Sun Wen said with a smile, "The 3 cities of Xueqi County are tasteless, but it's not a pity to abandon them.
It's better to make good use of them.
If we use it as bait, we can injure Lu Shi and prevent her from sending troops to threaten the northern borderline for a year or 2. At the same time, we can also help His Highness get rid of his greatest threat." The fourth prince's eyes flashed fiercely as he said, "My mortal enemy?" Sun Wen said, "The northern borderline has always been particular about choosing talents. Regardless of one's background, the fourth prince is naturally qualified to ascend to the throne. According to the inheritance system of the Han family, even if all his brothers died, the fourth prince would not have the right to inherit the throne. Who asked his mother to be a female slave for others to play with? However, the customs of Beijiang were different from those of the Central Plains. There were no rules in the northern borderline. Whichever child was stronger could inherit more property. Even if Prince Roland was just the son of a slave girl, he was still qualified to inherit the throne as long as he was strong enough. Sun Wen's short sentence quickly and accurately poked the fourth prince's weak spot. Prince Roland's hand that was holding the machete trembled, and even his breathing stopped suspiciously. Of course, he knew that he was qualified, but being qualified did not mean that he had hope. His mother's clan was too weak and barren. His starting point was the lowest among his brothers. If he wanted to overthrow the 8 brothers around him and ascend the throne, he would have to overcome 5 trials and kill 6 generals.
You think I have hope?
The fourth prince's breathing quickened. Sun Wenning had laid out such an inescapable trap. If Sun Wenning helped him with all his might, it might not be impossible for him to inherit the throne. Where there's a will, there's a way.
How would you know if you don't try?
Sun Wen's expression was indifferent. He didn't show any joy or sorrow, as if he was detached from the world. Among the 9 princes, the second prince has the strongest army. If the fourth prince wants to lay his hands on the throne, he will be the first person you have to get rid of. The first prince was using self-defiling methods to protect himself, but he was also secretly accumulating power, so he had to be on guard. One had a plan, killing several birds with one stone. Using the 3 cities of Xueqi County in exchange for Lu Shi being unable to mobilize his troops and for the first and second princes to be crippled.
Do you think it's worth it?
If he said that to Zhang Pengji, she would probably have twisted his head off long ago.
Do you know what it means to not give an inch of land?
Even if the land was left to grow weeds or turned into a cesspool, others could not even think about getting a piece of it. Zhang Pengji had once used the muzzle of a gun to poke the forehead of a neighbor from the Federation in order to negotiate with him. The 7th Army Corps was one of the 3 main battle armies. She directly spoke to the messenger. Either he retracted his leg, or he started a war. Fortunately, the person Sun Wen was talking to was the fourth prince and not the cruel Zhang Pengji. The fourth prince's eyelids twitched violently, and his heart beat wildly. He was about the same age as the first and second princes. When he was young, he was bullied,
humiliated, and bullied by the two. For the fourth prince, the two were like two mountains piled in front of him, so tall that it made him feel hopeless. At that moment, Sun Wen told him that he could get rid of the two of them and even prevent Lu Shi from mobilizing his troops. "Master, tell me quickly." The fourth prince clenched his fists nervously. Unknowingly, his emotions had been completely controlled by Sun Wen. "Your Highness, come closer." Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, and the fourth prince hurriedly leaned forward to listen. "Master Sun, please speak." Now is the end of the autumn grain harvest, and the grain is gradually being stored in the granary. The second prince is impatient and eager for quick success, but he is not good at management. In recent years, the price of grain in the north borderline has increased greatly. He keeps so many private soldiers under him, and the grain has long been unable to make ends meet. The fourth prince, why don't you privately create a map of the granary in Chongzhou and reveal it to the second prince? With the second prince's temperament, he will definitely keep it a secret and take all the benefits for himself. What was harvesting? The troops and horses were not given rations, and there was no logistical support. They completely relied on the soldiers to raise their own rations, plunder from the people, and be self-sufficient. The north borderline cavalry often harassed the people of Chongzhou, raided houses, and plundered rations. At first, when they found out that Jiang Pengji was in Chongzhou, they wanted to repeat the same trick. However, Jiang Pengji was too cunning. Every year, the location of the granary was different. The north borderline tried harvesting, but other than the first small victory, the troops who went to harvest almost starved to death in Chongzhou. After suffering a few losses, they knew that it was not easy to take advantage of Jiang Pengji. Harvesting was not very effective. Nowadays, the north borderline rarely organized large-scale cavalry to harvest. If the second prince wanted to take all the autumn grain for himself without anyone knowing, he definitely could not approach the border in the name of harvesting. Sun Wen continued, "In this way, to prevent the outside world from knowing, the second prince will definitely take the initiative to ask for permission to guard the 3 cities of Shangyu. The fourth prince will then play a small trick and send people disguised as Lu Shi's troops to kill a few of his personal guards. The second prince will blame this on Lu Shi. However, you must remember, you must not let your own personal guards disguise themselves. It is best to let the first prince's people do it. Even if the deed is exposed, others will only find out that it was the first prince who did it, and deliberately incite the second prince and Lu Shi to fight." The fourth prince nodded as he listened. Sun Wen continued, "Lu Shi has an explosive personality, and the second prince is obstinate and self-opinionated. If the two of them meet, it is impossible that they will not fight. However, no matter how many troops the second prince has, how long can he resist Lu Shi? The 3 cities of Shangyu County have not been repaired for many years. They will not be able to resist Lu Shi's powerful troops. If the second prince dies in battle, it will be fine, but if he doesn't, not only will he lose the private troops he has carefully raised, but he will also let the king see the number of troops he has and his ambition. As for the first prince, who deliberately provoked the war between the 2 sides, it will not be good either." As the fourth prince listened, he felt a chill in his heart, but at the same time, he could not suppress his excitement. Very quickly, he came back to his senses. "What about Lu Shi?" Sun Wen laughed. "The 3 cities of Shangyu are already in ruins. Lu Shi has to deal with the aftermath after conquering them. Isn't this a good way to divert his energy? Within a year or 2, how will he have the energy to start another war?" The fourth prince's eyes lit up. Yes, as long as the situation in the north borderline was peaceful for a year or 2. Master is indeed brilliant. Chapter 941. Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the northern borderline. He was full of conspiracies and tricks. Jiang Pengji was also ready for war. It was the autumn harvest. Everyone was so busy that their feet hardly touched the ground. When the autumn grain entered the warehouse, they felt more relaxed. This year's batch of autumn grain has entered the warehouse. Qiguan Rang presented a thick account book. Every grain collected was recorded in the book. Jiang Pengji flipped through it carefully. "With this batch of grain, we have the confidence to fight a war. Is there any news from Zixiao?" Qiguan Rang held his hands by his sides and said expressionlessly, "There's no news yet, but it should be soon." Jiang Pengji nodded and did not respond. Qiguan Rang endured for a while and had to take the initiative to speak. My lord has never seen Sun Wan. How do you know that he's as capable as Lu Shang? You trust him so easily. If he covets the power of the northern borderline. Qiguan Rang did not finish his sentence, but he believed that Zhang Pengji knew what he meant. We have to guard against him. Zhang Pengji said with a smile, I don't know if Sun Wan is as capable as Lu Shang, but it's enough for Zixiao to know. Qiguan Rang showed an expression that said, I knew it. He sighed and said, My lord has grown up. A cabbage had grown up and finally knew how to feed a pig. Look at what you're saying. It's as if the cabbage you painstakingly raised has been fed by a pig. Zhang Pengji teased. You're so jealous. Qiguan Rang secretly rolled his eyes and added in his heart. Isn't it the other way around? He trusted Wei Si's judgment because he trusted him. If not for some kind of honey filter, he believed that his lord would not be so rash. He frowned and said, My lord, when did you have such thoughts? After all, she was a female lord and was often criticized. If she could not maintain a clear relationship with her subordinates, her reputation might be tarnished. When did it happen? I can't remember. But Wen Zheng, you can rest assured that Zixiao will not affect my ambitions. Qiguan Rang had been observing the surrounding situation as an outsider. He saw the situation more clearly than the people involved. I'm not worried about my lord, but about Zixiao. Qiguan Rang frowned. Wei Si did not deliberately steal the limelight. He did not have a strong presence, but after thinking about what he had done, no one could say that he was not a pillar. Such a talent shouldn't be buried, nor should he be confined in a cage like a canary. If he didn't do that and allowed him to show off his talent, he would definitely die. Even if the Lord did not mind, would the other officials not have any thoughts about it? The most important thing for a faction was harmony and unity. Does it really have to be him? Asked Qiguan Rang. It has to be him. The more I get to know him, the more I feel that he's the one I want, Zhang Pengji said with certainty. Ambitious men, who wants to be a canary? If he doesn't want to live an ignoble life, I'm afraid my lord won't bear to let him suffer. If his identity was revealed, Wei Si would have to stay away from the center of power. It wasn't that they didn't trust him, but it was for the sake of unity within the faction so that others wouldn't feel unbalanced or have negative emotions. If Zhang Pengji insisted on having her own way, she might harm her and Wei Si. Then, what does Wenjing think? Qiguan Rang said, It's better to keep it a secret. Rang can pretend that he doesn't know anything. Keep it a secret? Zhang Pengji murmured repeatedly. As long as it's the Lord's child, it will definitely be your blood. It doesn't matter who the father is. Qiguan Rang said, You can say that you got pregnant because of feelings, or that you got married and had a child in your dream. As long as you have a child, you can keep the father's identity a secret. As long as others don't know who the father is, Zixiao can also continue to realize his ambitions and aspirations. But in this way, my lord and Zixiao will have to suffer. Zhang Pengji thought about it for a long time and laughed bitterly after a while. Wenjing, you're thinking too far ahead. We'll have to face it sooner or later. Qiguan Rang took over the account book that Zhang Pengji had finished reviewing and said expressionlessly, You should also pay attention to your emotions. What happens in private is none of my business. In daily life, you should at least control your emotions. Just like the previous time, she looked at Wei Si as if she wanted to skin him alive. It was always like that. Even the slow-witted generals could notice the clues. Qiguan Rang also reminded her in private to prevent his lord from doing something that she would regret for the rest of her life in the heat of youth. Wenjing, I'll think about it. Although she didn't want to admit it, Qiguan Rang's solution was considered the best of both worlds. It's still troubled times now. It's not suitable to think about these matters. We'd better get down to business. Zhang Pengji changed the topic stiffly. Qiguan Rang could only roll his eyes helplessly. As they were talking, Wei Si was summoned from outside the tent. Greetings, my lord. Wei Si first bowed, then nodded to Qiguan Rang, who was sitting next to Zhang Pengji. He took the initiative to sit on the other side. This is the tip-off I just received. The big fish has taken the bait. Wei Si handed over the booklet with both hands. Zhang Pengji took it and glanced at it. This Sun Wan is truly capable. This trick within a trick is truly beautiful. The letter said that Sun Wen had secretly plotted and successfully made the second prince of the northern borderline volunteer to take the order to be stationed in the 3 cities of Xiongyu. The 3 cities of Xiongyu were not the same as before. There was no profit to be made. They were almost treated as a place of exile by the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince wanted to gild himself. Why did he have to go to the 3 cities of Xiongyu? Self-exile? When the other princes received the news, they all had the same thought. But when they thought of the second prince's usual arrogance, they felt that it was unlikely. But other than that, they could not think of a reason why the second prince would take the initiative to go to the 3 cities of Xiongyu. The princes of the northern borderline discussed in private. Does the second prince think that the 3 cities of Xiongyu can still recruit soldiers and buy horses? He might really think so. But there is no profit to be made in the 3 cities of Xiongyu. He will only be disappointed if he goes. Maybe he's advancing by retreating? Using this to gain father's favor? If that's the case, this move is too lame. Humph. These people would not be able to figure it out even if they racked their brains. The second prince had a detailed distribution map of Chongzhou's granaries. According to reliable sources, the granaries stored Chongzhou's savings over the years. As long as the grain was taken away, Lu Shi would probably suffer a great loss. The second prince thought proudly. It was as if he could already see himself bringing back a huge amount of grain and being rewarded by the king. He had more soldiers in his hands than his other brothers. If he made a great contribution, he would not be far from the throne of the king of the northern borderline. Of course, the second prince was not stupid. He had already sent people to check the marked places in the granary beforehand. The news was true. Apart from that, this map was sent by his most trusted confidant, his mother's brother, his uncle. He trusted it so much because of all these reasons. Because of the huge amount of grain, the second prince made up his mind and pulled out all his private soldiers. Let's go. Chapter 942. The second prince rode a tall horse leisurely. This is Nanshan County of Xiongyu County? It doesn't look like much. It's not as prosperous as a small tribe in the north borderline. The houses on both sides of the street were dilapidated, and there were almost no traces of merchants. I heard that Xiongyu County was a good place in the past, where merchants and trade flourished. Things remain the same, but the people have changed. The second prince's advisor rode a step behind, looking around and sighing. Ha ha ha. It's just a small town at the border of the Central Plains. How prosperous can it be? The second prince laughed disdainfully. He brought 20,000 private troops to camp outside the city, while he brought 1,000 elites into the city. He spent all his fortune to train these 20,000 elites, and he loved them as if they were his eyes. In order to keep the benefits to himself, he gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and took out all his belongings. He volunteered to the king of the north borderline to take over the 3 cities of Xiongyu. The original guards were sent elsewhere. The second prince sat down boldly. The official registrar of Nanshan County trembled in front of him, waiting for orders. Report how many soldiers are left in the city. The official registrar trembled and said, There are 6,700 guards in the city. The second prince turned his head and sneered at the advisor. There are only 6,700 people in Nanshan County. What can such a small number of guards do? Lu Shi of Chongzhou is also a good-for-nothing. I heard that the pedantic Confucian scholars of Dongqing always talk about taking back their territory. Nanshan County's defense is so weak, yet Lu Shi doesn't send troops to fight back? It seems that the cowards of Dongqing are just shouting slogans when they take back their territory. The advisor smiled and flattered the second prince, saying a lot of good things, making the second prince feel comfortable. The second prince was full of confidence and spoke with fervor. Although Lu Shi is a bit of a coward, she's a girl after all. It's normal that she's not as courageous as a man. Although there are only 6,700 guards in Nanshan County, every one of them is an elite of the north borderline. They can fight against 10 men on the battlefield. Lu Shi is flattered by the outside world, but she's still a timid girl. She won't amount to much. The advisor's smile was a little awkward, but he still catered to the second prince and praised him. Compared to the second prince's blind arrogance, the advisor was somewhat clear-headed. Apart from anything else, he could understand why Jiang Pengji had not mobilized her troops to recapture the 3 cities of Xiongyu. First of all,
Fighting a war was not something that could be fought just because one wanted to. No matter how resentful the people of Dongqing were, the 3 cities of Xiongyu had been ceded by Dongqing to the northern borderline. This was the territory of the northern borderline. If they rashly sent their troops back, it would mean that they would completely fall out with the northern borderline and officially declare war on the northern borderline.
Secondly, fighting a war would consume too much energy, and the preparation would take a long time.
If they were to start a war without any preparation, how was that any different from courting death?
Thirdly, since the 3 cities of Xiongyu had been ruined by the northern frontier, it would not make much difference whether they were recaptured 2 years earlier or 2 years later.
He did not dare to say these words to the second prince, lest he spoil his mood.
Your Highness is right. The second prince laughed heartily and said to his advisor, You know me best. Overjoyed, the second prince feasted for 2 days and made friends with the local nobles. Although these nobles stayed in the 3 cities of Xiongyu as if they had been exiled, they were local tyrants who had been operating for many years. The 3 cities of Xiongyu could be considered as a buffer zone between the northern borderline and Dongqing. At the same time, it was also a lawless area where many smuggled goods were the most rampant. Most of these goods were war resources, and the profits were huge. Even the second prince could not help but be tempted by them. However, the happy time did not pass for long. An urgent message came to his ears.
Report. The loud and urgent voice of the messenger came from outside the room.
The second prince was holding a wine bottle and drinking with someone.
When he heard the voice, his dashing eyebrows knitted together in displeasure.
What happened? How dare you disturb my mood?
The messenger's breathing was rapid, and there was a hint of nervousness in his voice.
Your Highness, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of our soldiers outside Nanshan County, a total of 25 people.
What? The strong smell of alcohol came out of his nostrils. The second prince slammed the wine bottle on the table, and a deafening bang was heard. The advisor beside him stopped smiling and asked the messenger before the second prince lost his temper.
Who killed them? How did the 25 people die? The messenger told him everything in detail. Last night, during the handover of the patrol, a team of cavalry did not return. The next day, the patrolling cavalry found the corpses of the missing people not far from their post. There were signs of a struggle near the corpses. When the advisor heard this, his heart skipped a beat. Not good. Where are the corpses now?
Outside the hall.
Bring them up. The second prince's chest surged with anger.
He lifted his leg and flipped the wine table.
I want to see who dares to do this.
The loud bang shocked the singers and dancers in the hall, and they did not dare to move.
They trembled like quails.
After a series of footsteps, the soldiers of the northern borderline carried the corpses into the hall.
Other than the corpses, there were many clues found at the scene. The most important of them was a token. This token was none other than the token of a Chongzhou soldier. The weapons left behind and the words carved on the weapons all pointed to Chongzhou. After seeing this solid evidence, the second prince clenched his fists in anger and gritted his teeth. Lu Shi, I haven't found trouble with her, and she's already stirring up trouble. The second prince's anger soared. The advisor beside him groaned. Your Highness, we still need to investigate further. To conclude that Chongzhou's Lu Shi provoked us so hastily. What if it's not?
Before the advisor could finish, the second prince interrupted him.
What's so hasty about this? Besides Lu Shi, who else would do such a thing? Besides, even if Lu Shi didn't do it, so what? Sooner or later, I and Lu Shi will have to fight. The second prince volunteered to come to the 3 cities of Xiongyu. He wanted to use the 3 cities as a springboard to sneak attack Jiang Pengji's granary. He wanted to rest for 2 days before making a move. Now that Chongzhou could not sit still and test them, how could the second prince tolerate it? The advisor was speechless. For some reason, he felt that this matter was unreliable. The second prince said, Lu Shi killed 25 of my men. I will repay him tenfold. The advisor's eyelids twitched violently. He watched as the second prince sent someone to invite the soldiers to discuss military matters. When I take over her granary, Lu Shi will have no more grain. Let's see how arrogant she can be then. According to the map, there were a total of 3 granaries. The second prince had already sent people to check these 3 places. Almost all of them had stored 2 million dong of military rations. What did this mean?
300,000 dawn was enough for 100,000 soldiers to eat for more than a month. The grain that Lu Shi had accumulated over the years was enough for 100,000 soldiers to fight for 2 years. It was a pity that Lu Shi did not have a good eye for using people. He actually leaked the distribution map of such an important granary. Once she ran out of grain, she would be dead. The second prince looked in the direction of Chongzhou and gritted his teeth. If I can't transport the grain, I won't leave a single grain for you.
Chapter 943. Jiang Pengji had planted informants in the 3 cities of Shangyu early in the morning. She received the news as soon as the second prince's army entered the city. Finally, there's a battle to fight. If I don't fight, the weapons in my hands are going to rust. When Fu Wang received the news, he didn't even have time to change his armor before hurrying to the main tent. Li Yun, who was passing by with him, saw this and laughed helplessly as he shook his head. These few years of training have really stifled General Fu. Fu Wang had a warlike gene in his bones, so he couldn't settle down at all. After training for a few years and living a comfortable life, he felt uncomfortable all over. Usually, he could only rely on a lot of exercise and training soldiers to vent his excess energy. Because the training was too heavy, Fu Wang's soldiers complained incessantly. If it wasn't for Jiang Pengji, who couldn't stand it anymore and lightened the training load of the troops, someone might have died. Fu Wang walked briskly and said as he walked, "As a soldier, of course, we have to see blood often to maintain our sharpness." Why did he have to put on an act all day? No matter how well he acted, it was still fake. It's not that you didn't do a good job, it's just that you feel aggrieved. Fu Wang would often ask a few generals to spar with him. Other than Li Yun, who could exchange over 100 moves with him without being at a disadvantage, the others could not withstand his blows. Of course, the Wanzhou group had many generals who could fight, but people like Dian Yan and Meng Hun were not in Chongzhou. It was always Li Yun who was fighting. After a while, Fu Wang also felt bored. "General Fu, if you really want to fight to your heart's content, why don't you just look for my lord?" It would have been better if Li Yun had not mentioned it, but once he did, Fu Wang could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. If he fought with Li Yun, he had an 80% chance of winning, but if he fought with his lord, he basically had no chance of winning. He really didn't know what this woman ate growing up to be so good at fighting. When they arrived at the main tent, the strategists were already sitting in their seats. Jiang Pengji saw that everyone was present. She glanced at Qiguan Rang. He understood her intention and took out a declaration of war. "The barbarians slandered us for launching a sneak attack. In order to retaliate, they sent several teams of cavalry to harass the innocent civilians at the border. They massacred the villages there, burned, killed, and looted. Such vile and provocative behavior cannot be tolerated." Jiang Pengji said, "Do you have any opinions?" Feng Zhen said, "I believe that we should attack with a large force to show our military might." Wei Ci seconded. Fu Wang had long been looking forward to fighting, so of course he wouldn't disagree. He wanted nothing more than to raise his hands and feet high. Li Yun also knew that the upcoming battle was to prepare for the northern expedition next year. His blood was boiling. How could he not respond? Very well. Everyone in the tent was her confidant, so it was impossible for them to raise any objections. Jiang Pengji said to Qiguan Rang, "I'll have to trouble Wenjing to announce this declaration to the world, so that the world knows that it's not us who want to fight, it's the barbarians of the northern borderline who have gone too far." Qiguan Rang bowed to the end and said, "Yes." After going through the formalities, the next step was the crucial strategic deployment. The barbarians of the northern borderline have a set of fake maps of granaries. They are in Sang Mo, Lijiang, and Chao Wu. The person leading the troops was the second prince of the northern borderline. This person was greedy and self-opinionated. He definitely wanted to eat up the 3 granaries worth of grain. However, the granary was huge, so this person would definitely mobilize a large number of troops, and even a large portion of the garrison. In this way, the defense of the 3 cities would be quite weak. "Zhang Tu, I'll give you 10,000 troops. Can you conquer the 3 cities in 2 days?" Jiang Pengji raised her head and called Fu Wang's name. Fu Wang had been tense all along. When he heard his name, he immediately stepped forward. "Yes, General." Using 10,000 troops to conquer the 3 cities of Shangyu, which Dongqing had been longing for more than a decade, in 2 days? If this was in the past, It would definitely be a fantasy. But now it was different. Jiang Pengji had calculated.
According to the various conditions she had created today, it might not be impossible.
The second prince of the northern borderline was too greedy. He had the idea of eating up the 3 granaries.
It was impossible for him to rely on the 20,000 private troops that he had brought.
In order to gather enough manpower, this person had to transfer the garrison of the 3 cities. Before the second prince's arrival, the average garrison of the 3 cities was about 10,000 people. After transferring a portion, how many people would be left? The 3 fake granaries had attracted most of the garrison forces, causing the 3 cities to be empty and weak.
The 10,000 troops that she had allocated to Fu Wang were all elites who had been carefully trained for several years and were well equipped.
They could definitely withstand such a concentrated battle. Not to mention 1 against 5, but 1 against 3 would not be a problem. If Fu Wang still could not conquer the 3 cities of Xueqi County before the reinforcements from the northern borderline arrived, it would be a disgrace to his reputation.
Han Mei.
Li Yun stepped forward and quietly waited for orders. Jiang Pengji said, I order you to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Lijiang. You must annihilate the enemy and not leave any loose ends.
Yes.
I plan to lead 6,000 troops to ambush Sang Mo. After the enemy is annihilated, Han Mei and I will meet up and cut off the enemy's main force. There were 3 fake granaries, Sang Mo, Lijiang, and Chao Wu. Among them, Chao Wu's was the largest. It was almost the sum of the reserves of the other 2 granaries. After discussing with a few strategists, Jiang Pengji unanimously believed that the headstrong second prince would personally lead the troops to ambush Chao Wu. After all, there was the most food there. The evacuation route was the smoothest. The second prince had a penchant for doing things himself and showing off his military strength. In conclusion, it was most likely that the enemy would lead the main force to ambush Chao Wu. In order to delay time and confuse the second prince's judgment, Jiang Pengji placed a lot of food in Chao Wu. Transporting the food would delay their marching speed. When Jiang Pengji and Li Yun waited and devoured the enemy's forces, they could take a shortcut to intercept and ambush the second prince's main force. It would be best if they could capture the second prince alive. If not, they would just kill him. They had to meet up with Fu Wang before the reinforcements at the borders of the north borderline could react. To prevent any accidents, Jiang Pengji ordered the remaining troops to stand guard. After assigning tasks to the generals, Jiang Pengji swiftly and decisively assigned tasks to the strategists. At that moment, the whole main tent was filled with a tense atmosphere. It even affected the viewers in the streaming room. Lao Ciji Lianming, after so many years, I finally see the streamer's handsome side. Marin Wei Zixiao. Hello everyone. Let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend, Lord Jiang Pengji. Zhu Gonggong Jiang Pengji. Oh my click. Beauty Wei Zixiao Mulan Danguzi. To the person above, are you trying to stir up trouble? Please respect such a hot-blooded scene. Gue Kai Guo Fengxiao. High energy warning ahead. Friends on the blue bullet screen, if you're not used to blood, you'd better leave the streaming room quickly. Let me say this in advance. Our streamer is very cruel. The content of her streaming would scare the timid people out of their wits. The viewers on the red bullet screen were delighted to see this. The viewers on the blue bullet screen were not to be outdone. Although they did not understand, they felt that it was awesome. How could they leave the streaming room and fulfill the wishes of the viewers on the red bullet screen? No. They would not leave. Finally, I've been preparing for more than 3 years. Everyone, it's all up to you. It was time to let the north borderline see her fangs. Chapter 944. The night was gloomy, the moon was dark, and the wind was strong. Hearing that the second prince was going to fight in person, the guards and advisors around him felt like their heads were going to explode. Your Highness, your body is precious. Swords have no eyes on the battlefield. If you are accidentally hurt, we won't be able to answer to the king. His personal guards tried to dissuade him, and his advisors also echoed him. However, the second prince had a headstrong temperament and felt very good about himself. He said, I studied hard with the martial arts master. Even my father praised me as a warrior of the northern borderline. How can I be afraid of death? Before he was an adult, he had defeated his martial arts master, defeated several guards who were his sparring partners, and killed the enemy bravely on the battlefield. He always brought back a lot of trophies.
He was the brave and powerful man of the northern borderline.
How could the weak soldiers of the Central Plains hurt him? The northern borderline was not peaceful.
There were many voices within.
If a small tribe developed too fast or did not obey the orders of the imperial court, it would inevitably lead to an expedition by the imperial court. However, such small fights were usually used for the second generation of the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince had led troops on several expeditions and won every time. This made him arrogant and complacent, and he could not even see his own abilities clearly. As a prince, it was enough to stay in the rear and wait for military achievements. Why did he have to go to the front to cause trouble and make things difficult for his teammates? Did he not know what his own abilities were? The advisors and guards repeatedly tried to persuade the second prince, but not only did they not persuade him, they even caused him to reprimand and insult. In the end, he stubbornly said, "No need to persuade me anymore. I have made up my mind." The more the people around him tried to persuade him, the angrier he got, and the more he wanted to prove himself. Lu Shi, a woman, could kill the enemy on the battlefield.
He, a brave man of the northern borderline, was inferior to a woman? Wait until I catch Lu Shi myself.
The second prince looked around and snorted, as if he was mocking.
Although he was headstrong, the second prince also knew that his life was precious, and he would still listen to the advisor's arrangements in some areas.
He asked the vanguard troops to change into the uniforms of the Han soldiers and raise Jiangpengji's flag. It was best if they did not encounter the enemy, but if they encountered the enemy's patrol troops, they could use it to get away with it. The night was dark and windy, and it was suitable for robbery. The second prince ordered everyone to hold wooden chopsticks in their mouths and cover their mouths with cloth. They were not allowed to make any noise. The 12,000 soldiers split into several groups and advanced towards Chao Wu along the small paths on the map.
Because of the detailed map in his hand, the second prince led his troops to avoid several waves of sentries, and the journey was more daunting than dangerous.
As they approached Chao Wu's granary, the number of patrols increased. Even with the cover of night, they were still caught red-handed.
"Who is it?"
The second prince panicked. The vanguard officer beside him replied in fluent Mandarin of the Central Plains. "We were sent by Lu Prefecture Overseer to reinforce the granary. The prefecture magistrate is worried that the barbarians of the northern borderline will attack the granary." This vanguard official was also a talent. When he lied, his face didn't turn red, and he didn't even pant. He even revealed a look of awe-inspiring righteousness. The night was too dark, and there was some distance between them, so the guards couldn't see how many people were with the second prince. They asked a few questions and let them pass. The second prince was relieved, but then he felt a little disdainful.
That's all. Perhaps the luck of the first half of the night had run out.
The second prince encountered several patrols in a row, and they were getting more and more adept at dealing with them. Unknowingly, he had been delayed for an hour. At that moment, they were less than a quarter of an hour away from Chao Wu's granary. Compared to the smooth journey on the second prince's side, the other two routes did not have such preferential treatment.
Along the way, they only encountered 3 waves of patrols, and they used the same method of lying to fool them.
Little did they know that the patrols under Jiangpengji were different from other patrols. Before dealing with each other, they had to match the secret signal. If the secret signal didn't match, they would be killed. Of course, it was different today. The patrols had received instructions from their superiors that if they met someone they couldn't match the secret signal with, they should not make a sound and cooperate with the other party's performance. The North Borderline thought that their operation was smooth, but they didn't know that their every move was within the enemy's expectations. Li Jiang's granary. Li Yun chewed on some hay in his mouth.
He held his spear with one hand and wiped the tip of the spear with the other.
His sharp eyes were surging with the desire to fight.
Nuanyuan, wait for me to return.
Li Yun threw the wiping cloth aside. The hurried footsteps of his subordinates were getting closer. "Commander Li Yun, the enemy has formed a formation and surrounded the granary." Just in time. Li Yun straightened his body.
He grabbed the white reins of his warhorse with one hand and nimbly flipped himself onto the horse. He held his spear high in the air.
"Deploy the troops to meet the enemy."
At that moment, the sound of fighting could be heard from outside the granary.
2,000 cavalrymen rushed towards Li Jiang's granary. Charge! Based on past experiences, the granary's defensive line would not be able to withstand a single wave of their charge. It would collapse 1,000 miles away. Not to mention that they had appeared suddenly. Chongzhou should not have been prepared.
If they met the enemy without any preparation, it would be even more impossible to block the iron hooves of their cavalrymen.
It was different this time.
When the cavalrymen in rattan armor formed a formation and accelerated their charge, the front hooves of the horses suddenly missed their footing and they fell forward with great inertia.
A group of human heads emerged from the ground.
They held unknown sickle-like weapons in their hands and ruthlessly slashed at the legs of the horses, causing them to fall forward in pain. After doing that, they immediately retracted their heads into the ground and used the same trick on the second echelon who could not react in time. Dozens of circular trenches were dug around the Lijiang granary in a radius of 200 feet. This was to deal with the first wave of the north borderline's cavalrymen. The distance between the trenches did not follow any pattern. There were even circular waves. To conceal the existence of the trenches, the empty space was covered with grass. Coupled with the cover of the night, no one could see any clues. Near the center of the granary, there were densely packed caltrops scattered between the trenches. Seeing this, the troops from the north borderline also realized that they had fallen into an ambush. Lijiang's granary was not a piece of fatty meat. It was clearly a trap with fatty meat. However, the cavalry's speed was too fast. A distance of 200 feet was nothing at all. When they realized that it was an ambush and attempted to retreat, the first batch of cavalrymen had already rushed to the granary.
You want to retreat?
Have you asked for the permission of the spear in my hand? To make it easier to face the enemy, a small path about 5 feet wide was left in all directions of the granary. At the same time, a similar scene was happening in Sang Mo's granary. Zhang Pengji was someone who could not sit still. She did not like to mark documents and was passionate about personally fighting in battle. The north borderline was there to attack the granary and steal the grain. Apart from bringing weapons and troops, their troops also brought along a large number of carriages used to transport the grain. The troops at the front lost and their morale plummeted. The troops at the back tried to retreat. The carriages became an obstacle for their cavalrymen. They were stuck in one place and could not break through in all directions. The quality of the north borderline's cavalrymen was not bad. Although the performance at the back was embarrassing, the remaining cavalrymen began to organize a charge to break through. Horse-slaying battalion, go forward and form a formation. The order was given. A whistling arrow soared into the sky. Chapter 945. Xingyue Tianyun. Who was the one with the high energy warning just now? Why don't you make it clear? EW. No, the baby is going to vomit for a while. Has your streaming room always been so bloody and violent? F***ck me. You're going to split me and my horse in half? Streamer Wadajun. Why hasn't such a bloody and violent live broadcast room been shut down? Feng's remembrance. You make it sound like the streamer who promoted a certain color has been censored. Chow Lauda. Watching this kind of live stream in the middle of the night, it's really creepy. Why couldn't the cross-dimensional live stream be more harmonious? It was either pornographic or violent. Watching too much of it would affect the physical and mental health of young children. That was the content of the blue bullet screen. Compared to their panic, the red bullet screen viewers were much calmer. He was not surprised at all. Wuya Zhongxing. The host isn't always so violent. She's usually reasonable. She only uses her fists when she can't be reasoned with. Those people from the northern borderline are asking for a beating. My streamer is so handsome that he has no friends. Host. When are you going to marry me? Bellflower in the starry sky. The streamer is a master of the aesthetics of violence. She gets more and more violent every time. In the past, he only knew how to chop people with axes. Now, he could even chop people and horses in half. Full marks for that close-up just now. Zhang Pengji personally led the troops at Sang Mo's granary. When the two parties engaged in battle, she would act as a member of the Zhanma battalion. The horse-chopping battalion was a special battalion that she had specially trained to deal with the cavalry of the northern borderline. The weapons in their hands were all specially forged, and the modeo in their hands was incomparably sharp. The blades were heavy and broad. Compared to the speed of the cavalry, the horse-slaying battalion pursued stability and ruthlessness. They didn't need a lot of speed. They just needed to coordinate with other units to resist the cavalry and reduce the pressure on all sides.
The soldiers of the horse-chopping camp were all carefully selected from the various battalions. Their pay was twice as high as that of ordinary soldiers, and their daily training was also much heavier. Because the armors and weapons used by the horse-chopping camp were heavier, the requirement for the soldiers' stamina and strength was higher. If they didn't have a strong physique and strength, they wouldn't be able to fight for a long time. In order to increase their endurance in battle, Zhang Pengji also allowed the soldiers of the Zhanma battalion to adopt the improved three-stage battle tactic of the crossbowmen. Take turns to lighten the load. In addition to all kinds of high-intensity training, the various military camps would also hold regular military exercises. Different units would cooperate and fight against each other. Although the military drill was fake, Zhang Pengji let the veterans lead the new recruits in pursuit of a simulated battle environment. Most of the soldiers under him had never seen blood before, but their combat skills and obedience to orders were not inferior to elite soldiers. The streaming room was always the Zhang Pengji Zhang's perspective. She, who had always walked the agile route, gave up on speed, and changed the weapon in her hand from a spear to a heavy zanmadeo. With every swing of the blade, the audience could clearly see the entire process of the blade slicing through flesh. She did not deliberately restrain her strength. The heavy zanmadeo in her hand was like nothing. Chopping. War. Jiang. Blood. Blood. The audience of the stream. The Tian. The king. Hoo. The tie with the horse. The audience in the streaming room saw with their own eyes that Zhang Pengji swung her sword downwards. Like watching a watermelon, she split open the body of a soldier from the northern borderline's head. She also cut the warhorse under him into two at the waist. Zhang Pengji. The king. Most of the northern borderline cavalry was light cavalry. They followed the rogue policy of running away if they couldn't win. They had always been a headache for the Dongqing military. However, they were blocked by the wagon they brought. Zhang Pengji. The Zhanma battalion formed a curved formation to block their way. She surrounded them. She planned to wipe out the enemy. How could she let the meat fly away? Compared to Sang Mo and Li Jiang, Chao Wu's granary was a rat's paradise. What kind of soldiers are Lu Shi's? The soldiers of the Central Plains are all useless. None of them can fight. The second prince broke through the defense of Chao Wu's granary. The defense of the camp was weak. They fought in a hurry. Soon, they were defeated and ran in all directions. The second prince looked at Chao Wu's granary. He was proud of himself. Don't chase. Move the food. The second prince cut off the heads of the corpses. He tied their hair into knots and hung them on the saddle. These were his spoils of war. They were strong evidence of his military strength. He broke open the door of the granary. It was full of food. To be cautious, the second prince used the dagger at his waist to cut open a few bags of food. Clear yellow grains flowed out like water. Lu Shi is rich. It's all good food. After confirming it, the second prince ordered people to move the food. The advisor followed the second prince. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what. After a while he said, "Your Highness, there's so much food in Chao Wu's granary. Why didn't Lu Shi send a large number of soldiers to guard it?" The second prince said, "A large number of soldiers? Didn't you see those deserters? There are at least 5,000 or 6,000 of them, right?" According to combat experience, the number of soldiers guarding the granary was about that. However, the advisor didn't know that there were only about 2,000 soldiers guarding the granary. The number of 5,000 or 6,000 was too much. The soldiers seemed disorderly, but they were actually prepared to flee. They ran in other directions. After several trips, it gave the illusion that there were 5,000 or 6,000 deserters. I heard that Lu Shi trained his soldiers for 3 or 5 years. His elite soldiers are like this. The advisor awkwardly found a way out for himself to avoid angering the second prince again. The second prince laughed and said, "Sheep are sheep. No matter how they train, how can they beat the wolves on the grassland?" The Han men of the Central Plains gave him the impression that they were weak bamboo poles that could be blown away by the wind. Such men couldn't even satisfy the Han women, let alone fight the valiant generals of the northern borderline. The entire granary of Chao Wu had a total of 1.4 million dawn of grain. Even if the second prince brought 12,000 soldiers and horses, they couldn't load all of them into the supply wagons in a short time.
Moreover, they did not bring that many wagons with them. If I had known that there was so much grain here and that the soldiers guarding the grain were so weak, I would have brought 10 more wagons.
In order not to waste food, every wagon was filled with grain. The wheels were deeply embedded in the mud. Not only were the wagons full of grain, but he also asked each cavalry to carry 2 bags of grain on their backs. Seeing this, the advisor's scalp went numb. The cavalry's advantage was their mobility. How could they run if they encountered danger with the heavy bags of grain on their backs? Your Highness, this is not appropriate. Chapter 946. I know what you're worried about. Aren't you afraid of Lu Shi's sudden appearance? You're as timid as a mouse. The second prince laughed. His face was insolent and his eyes were filled with contempt and disdain. He said arrogantly, "So what if she comes? It just so happens that I lack a concubine to warm my bed. If she comes, I can reluctantly accept her. When I'm done playing, I'll let you have a taste of her to boost your courage." The advisor did not refute him because he knew that the second prince was in high spirits and no one could provoke him. He had long been accustomed to the second prince's arrogance. At this time, he could only shake his head tiredly. He was hopeless. Now he could only hope that everything would go smoothly and nothing would go wrong along the way. However, some people could not stand nagging, such as Jiang Pengji, whom the advisor was worried about. The second prince smiled and said, "You're really worrying for nothing." Before he finished speaking, the ground under his feet trembled slightly, as if something was rushing from afar. At first, the movement was so small that it was almost undetectable. As time went by, the movement became more and more obvious. The pebbles on the ground also trembled. The ground moved? This was the advisor's first reaction. His second reaction was, his heart skipped a beat and a terrible idea came to mind. Quickly abandon all the provisions. There's an enemy attack, the advisor roared. The second prince was about to turn over and get on the horse when he suddenly heard the roar. He stumbled and almost fell off the horse. What are you roaring for? Where did the enemy attack come from? The second prince's reaction was a beat slower. The trembling under his feet became more and more obvious. Only then did he realize that something was wrong. Is this an earthquake? The second prince did not think in the direction of the enemy attack at all. He thought that it was a natural disaster. No, it's not an earthquake. It's clearly an enemy attack. Your Highness, please give the order immediately to abandon the provisions and fight. The advisor's breathing was rapid and he was in a panic. It was dark around him as if there were countless giant beasts hibernating in the darkness and staring at him. A feeling of suffocation surged in his heart. The advisor lost his composure and shouted at the second prince, hoping to drown out the commotion around him. The second prince was angry and was about to speak when a scout came riding quickly on a horse. Whoa! The scout turned over and dismounted. He said to the second prince, "There are traces of enemies on the left flank." Unable to determine the specific number. The second prince's eyes widened in shock. How could there be enemies? Could it be that the granary guard who just ran away called for help? That's not right. Chao Wu's granary is 2 days' journey from Lu Shi's military camp. It's only been a few hours. How can he call for reinforcements in time? When the advisor saw that the second prince was still staring at him, he was so angry that he wanted to jump up and curse. Was there even a need to think about such a stupid question? It was clearly premeditated. At this time, the right-wing scout also hurried over on horseback. Report. Our right wing has discovered an unknown number of enemies. The second prince had led his troops to clear out small tribes, but his combat experience was of no value at all. He was dumbfounded when he encountered a big scene. Quickly, abandon the rations and prepare for battle. The advisor was so angry that his face turned red. Now he could not count on the second prince as a teammate at all. He could only rely on him to overstep his authority. The advantage of the cavalry of the northern borderline was their mobility. How could they fight a battle with 2 big sacks of provisions on their backs? Once the horse was engaged in battle with the enemy, it would not be able to gallop. It could only coordinate with the enemy's attacks or trample on them. The advantage of speed would disappear. At this time, if they carried 2 heavy sacks of provisions to fight a battle, perhaps the soldiers on the horses would not die of exhaustion, but the horses would collapse. The second prince's eyes were red. He stared at the advisor and clenched his teeth. Listen to my order.
Abandon the rations and form a formation to fight.
They had brought too many wagons that were used to steal provisions. They could not form a formation at all. The advantage of charging to cut through the enemy's formation was also lost. Everything happened too suddenly. The second prince, the leader, was a fool. The people below him could only be at a loss like headless flies.
Fortunately, they still had the qualities of the soldiers of the northern borderline.
When they encountered traces of the enemy, they wanted to form a formation immediately. Due to the obstruction of the wagons, the process seemed slow and inefficient. While they were in a mess, the enemy's army had already attacked from the left and right flanks, outflanking them. Jiang Pengji led the vanguard battalion of the cavalry and took the lead. She took the longbow from the back of the horse and lit the arrow. She let go of the reins while charging and easily pulled the bow to a full moon. Release. Jiang Pengji released the bowstring when she was less than 100 feet away from the enemy troops of the northern borderline. After a buzzing sound, the burning arrow streaked across the sky with a smear of orange and shot into the enemy's territory. After the arrow was fired, she took control of the reins again.
She steered the warhorse under her to turn quickly to the other side. The soldiers of the cavalry battalion could not shoot from a long distance like her, but they did a good job.
Han Mei really has a tacit understanding. He came neither early nor late. As the saying goes, it is better to come at the right time than to come early. Li Yun's sneak attack was coordinated perfectly. Jiang Pengji had a carefree smile on her face.
She galloped on the horse and shot a few waves of fire arrows, all aimed at the cavalry of the northern borderline.
Zhenshermingguzi, streamer, the rations are all piled up there. If you fire the fire arrows, won't they all burn? They knew Jiang Pengji's temperament. She was generous to others, but she was stingy with her own food. Every time she ate, she always ate the last grain of rice.
To let such a thrifty person set fire to the food that the people had painstakingly cultivated was really heart-wrenching.
Pian Kasai, if you don't sacrifice your child, you won't be able to catch the wolf. Using such a batch of rations to exchange for tens of thousands of soldiers and horses from the northern borderline is a great deal. If the cavalry of the northern borderline were to enter the battlefield, not only would the streamer lose rations, but she would also lose many elite troops that she had painstakingly trained. Moreover, didn't you notice that after the fire arrows were fired, the fire quickly grew bigger? After being reminded by the audience in the streaming room, many people came to their senses. That's right, the fire was too big. Although it was a dry and flammable season, it shouldn't have caught fire so easily, right? At that moment, a veteran in the streaming room pointed out the key point.
Yewu Yenling, there's a problem with the rations.
The audience strenuously observed. Indeed, they discovered that the stray fire arrows had pierced the rations and the fire had spread quickly. Nuzwang Xinghan, the streamer is indeed wicked. Other than the outermost rations in the Chao Wu granary that are real, the ones inside are all fake, right? No matter how vigilant the enemy is, it is impossible for them to open up all the rations and check them. Just as the audience guessed, Jiang Pengji only put tens of thousands of dawn of real rations in the Chao Wu granary. The rest were all fake. Xinjia. But I have a doubt. If it's fake rations, won't the grain bag feel different when touched? How could Jiang Pengji not consider this problem? She asked someone to smear the inside of the grain bag with a sticky liquid, then rolled it in the rations and stuck a layer of rations on it. Chapter 947. At this time, not only the audience in the live broadcast room found something fishy, but the cavalry of the northern borderline also found something wrong. The advisor felt his teeth tremble. He raised his hand to pull out a dagger and fiercely cut open the grain bag. The inside of the grain bag was thick with grain, but apart from this layer, it was full of hay, firewood, and stones. It was fake. It was all fake. They were fooled. At this moment, the advisor regretted it. Lu Shi was able to get to where he was today. How could he be an ordinary person who relied on his father? If the map of the granary was so easy to get, how could Lu Shi get to where he was today? From the beginning to the end, it was all Lu Shi's plan, to lead their second prince here. In an instant, the advisor's mind turned again and again. He even wanted to escape during the chaos. If he continued to follow the second prince, he wouldn't even know when he would die. But the advisor also knew that he was just a scholar. Without the protection of the soldiers, he might be shot into a hornet's nest as soon as he went out. On the other side, the advisor was experiencing mental torture, and the second prince was not in a good situation either. He had never experienced such a big battle before.
When he conquered a small tribe, it seemed that he was the one in command, but in fact, it was the same without him.
It was just a small tribe. How could they fight against the iron hooves of the northern borderline? The victory of the small tribe made the second prince arrogant, and he had no idea of his real ability.
He thought that if others praised him for being brave and good at fighting, he would really be brave and good at fighting.
He didn't know that if he was not the second prince of the northern borderline king, he was not even a fart. At most, he was an arrogant bastard.
Don't panic. Don't panic. I will kill anyone who dares to panic. Get into formation. Get into formation. Get into formation. Do you hear me? Damn, who dares to escape?
No matter how stupid he was, he knew how bad the situation was. The fire spread, and the warhorse was frightened and kept running around. It took the second prince a lot of effort to calm it down. The soldiers around him were in a mess, like headless flies.
He was angry and pulled out his sword to cut off the head of the person next to him, relying on bloody means to win a trace of calmness.
Needless to say, this trick really worked, and the formation of the northern borderline soldiers finally had some shape. The advisor hurriedly said, "Your Highness, the most important thing right now is your safety." His words reminded the second prince of something. Nothing was more important than his life. Round after round of fire arrows were fired from the outside. It was as if Lu Shi's soldiers were surrounding them from all directions. It was impossible to find a way out. If the cavalry wanted to charge out of the sea of fire, Lu Shi's soldiers would stop them and force them back. The second prince grabbed his advisor's wrist in a panic. "How do we break out?" The advisor said, "Naturally, we'll gather our forces and break through from the weakest point." How could he ask such a stupid question? This teammate was too much of a scammer. The second prince took a few deep breaths and summoned his personal guards to prepare to break out of the encirclement. Although he had 12,000 soldiers with him, most of them were cavalry. If the terrain was open, breaking out of the encirclement would not be a problem. How could a two-legged man outrun a four-legged horse?
Unfortunately, they were also carrying a large number of supply wagons, which were filled with heavy sacks of grain, further limiting the range of movement of the cavalry.
Apart from that, Jiang Pengji also set fire to the rations on the carriages. They had no time to care about anything else. Lu Shi, B*TCH. The second prince gritted his teeth in anger. He did not know what went wrong, but he knew that there was something wrong with the map he had obtained. If it was not premeditated, how could Lu Shi have calculated it so accurately? It was estimated that not only Chao Wu's granary, but Li Zhong's and Sang Mo's granaries were also ambushed. The second prince's eyes reddened when he thought of the private troops he had spent a lot of money to raise. "Your Highness, now is not the time to be angry. Where there's life, there's hope. Your safety is more important." The advisor interrupted the second prince's thoughts. It was more important to escape now. What was the point of thinking so much? The two sides broke through the encirclement. The second prince, escorted by more than 1,000 elites, prepared to break out of the encirclement. When Jiang Pengji received the news, her face revealed a blood-stained and hideous smile. "Escape? Have you asked me? After you catch him, break his legs." She put the bow and arrows back on the horse's back and picked up the heavy Mo sword again. "Catch him alive." After Jiang Pengji's reminder, the audience in the streaming room realized that the enemy leader was about to escape. How could he do that? Lao Siji Lianming. Although the streamer used a trick, they are still a group of cavalrymen. I look down on them for running away before the battle even starts. Cat Demon June. Running away when you can't win is the essence of cavalrymen. Usually, it's either a small defeat or a big victory. It's probably unprecedented in history to be so miserable. Who asked them to be greedy? But then again, the person who made the plan was too evil. Let me worship for 2 seconds. But then again, who was the person who made the plan this time? The audience was stunned for a moment and almost forgot about it. Xinjia, this plan was made by Beauty CI, the streamer, and Sun One, right? But the chief planner is that old man Sun Wen. This old man has a bright future. When he's done undercover, he'll be among the top strategists. The trick was used too well. Who was Sun Wen? The audience was stunned for another 2 seconds. They couldn't be blamed for their poor memory. It was because Sun Wen had never appeared in the streaming room and they hadn't seen him. Mo Lingyin. Sigh, Sun Wen. I've personally witnessed the rise of another Prince Charming in the streaming room. Although Sun Wen was an old man whose grandson was 7 or 8 years old, his charm didn't discriminate by age. The audience paid unprecedented attention to Sun Wen. Jiang Pengji couldn't care less about the streaming room. She led the troops to chase after the second prince and his men. What a joke. Capturing the second prince would be considered a real victory. If they let this fat fish escape, the value of this operation would be reduced by at least 50%. The advisor held the reins tightly and leaned over the horse's back. The war horse was too bumpy. He felt as if his internal organs were going to be shaken out. There are pursuers behind us. The second prince only cared about running for his life. His nerves had long been stretched taut.
Hearing that there were pursuers behind him, he was so anxious that he whipped the horses but hard and tried to speed up.
Hurry, hurry, hurry. He screamed anxiously in his heart. Unfortunately, the gods of the grassland didn't hear his prayers. The god of slaughter had already drawn his bow and arrow from behind him. He pulled the bow fully and suddenly released it. There was a buzzing sound in his ears, like a cool breeze blowing beside his ears. In the next moment, he felt something sharp piercing into his right shoulder. The sharp pain spread from his shoulder to his whole body. He couldn't maintain his posture.
He screamed and fell directly from the horse to the ground.
Capture the barbarians of the northern borderline alive. Jiang Pengji put away her bow and arrow. She took out her mo sword and chopped off the heads of several people at the end of the enemy troops. Chapter 948.
Ah! A loud and tragic cry sounded.
The second prince's shoulder was pierced by Jiang Pengji's arrow. The intense pain and the residual force of the arrow forced him to lose his balance and fall off the horse. His horse sprinted forward for a long distance due to inertia. Fortunately, the second prince was lucky. He was not trampled by the horse's hooves and caused a second injury, but he was dizzy from the fall. The advisor, who was holding the reins, heard the movement and looked back from the horse's back. The second prince had fallen off the horse. The pursuers behind him were quickly closing the distance. Now there were only 2 options in front of him. Either he turned around and went back to save the second prince, or he continued to run. Escape was the best strategy of the 36 stratagems. These 2 options went through the advisor's mind. He chose the former without hesitation. It was not because he was loyal, but because he knew that this was a battlefield and Jiang Pengji's territory. If he chose the latter and ran away alone, there was a 99% chance that he would be caught by Lu Shi's troops who were cleaning up the battlefield. The probability of his death was extremely high. Even if he was lucky enough to escape, there was no way for him to return to the northern borderline safely. Even if he returned to the northern borderline, he would definitely die. He could not afford to lose a prince of the northern borderline. On the contrary, if he turned back at this time, there was a high chance that he would become a captive. He would lose his freedom, but his life would be guaranteed. If he was lucky, he might have a chance to be recruited. He could take advantage of the situation and jump onto Lu Shi's ship. It was a way out. In a split second, the advisor had thought through everything and even arranged a seemingly perfect escape route for himself.
Second prince, come and save his highness. The advisor turned his horse around. When he arrived, several soldiers of the northern borderline had already carried the unconscious second prince onto the back of the horse. However, they could not stop the enemies who were approaching quickly from behind. Not to mention the ruthless killer. You send the second prince away first. I will stay with the others to delay them. The advisor secretly gritted his teeth and made a decision. It seemed that he was making a righteous decision, but in fact, he was playing a petty trick. The enemy's hatred was always on the second prince. Even if they stayed to delay them, the enemy would split up to chase after them. The personal guard did not say much. He raised his hand and whipped the horse. The horses neighed in pain and galloped madly. In less than 2 breaths, the enemies at the very front had arrived. My life is over. The advisor chose to hide behind the soldiers to preserve his life as much as possible. Jiang Pengji rushed and killed several people along the way. She had the imposing manner of killing anyone who stood in her way and killing anyone who stood in her way.
The advisor's heart was about to burst from fear. "Kill anyone who dares to resist, the rest of you follow me." She said that she would break his legs if she caught him, and she meant it. Jiang Pengji did not stop at all. She rode on her horse and killed from left to right. The war horse under her raised its hooves and stomped on the ground. Soon, the cavalrymen who were left behind were killed and their horses were thrown off their feet. Jiang Pengji chased after the second prince.
The cavalry of the northern borderline tried to stop them, but the cavalry vanguard battalion led by Jiang Pengji was not to be trifled with.
Jiang Pengji's night vision was excellent. Others might only be able to see a blurry silhouette, but she could see it clearly.
Jiang Pengji aimed at the second prince, who was carried by the guards of the northern borderline, and pulled out another arrow.
"Zhao Yue. Ha ha ha, I feel sorry for the second prince.
If his subordinates did not drag him away, he would only have to suffer once."
Jiang Pengji once again demonstrated her superb archery skills. With one arrow, she shot through the second prince and the guards who were carrying him. If she did not want to capture him alive, the arrow would have been aimed at their vital parts. Yuran Ma Shangsing. Tisk, TSK. The war horse is not much shorter than an adult. He was shot by 2 arrows and fell off the war horse twice. How unlucky must he be to be able to do that? From what I see, even if the streamer showed mercy, the second prince will still become silly from the fall. Zizhu Lin Shuxian. Pft, the person above, you are wrong. Why would the second prince need to fall silly? His IQ and brain are not that great, right? After falling, maybe he did not become silly. Instead, he became smarter. After all, he could not be any more silly. Su Shuawei. The streamer's archery skills are so amazing that I have no friends. Can you guys make it? When I saw the dazzling arrow she shot in the live streaming room, it did not feel like it fell on the husky prince. It clearly hit the baby's heart. His whole body. Li Wushuang. The husky prince flips the table. Do you think I don't care about my reputation? When the audience in the live streaming room jokingly called the second prince of the northern borderline the husky prince, Jiang Pengji had already caught up with them. Needless to say, which mortal body could withstand the Zanmadeo in her hand and her strange strength? People were cutting melons and vegetables, but she was cutting people like melons and vegetables. With one slash, not only the person, but also the horse that the person was riding was cut into 2. Puffed. After a quarter of an hour, Jiang Pengji spat out the blood that had accidentally flowed into her mouth. The elites of the northern borderline still had some courage. Half of them resisted stubbornly and were killed, while the other half gave up because their morale was greatly reduced. Jiang Pengji's chest rose and fell rapidly. She breathed rapidly and shouted angrily, "Tie them all up. How about the animals? How about them?" Yes. The subordinate obeyed the order. Jiang Pengji threw the Zanmadeo in her hand to the side and asked, "Where is the fat fish?" Jiang Pengji could use such a contemptuous term as fat fish to humiliate her opponent, but the vanguard battalion under her did not dare to say the same. The enemy's general has been captured. 2 soldiers dragged the second prince, who had been shot twice and had fainted. Accompanying him was the advisor, who was in a sorry state. The advisor was dressed like a scholar. At a glance, it was obvious that he was a scholar who engaged in intellectual activities. The soldiers were not too rough with him. Jiang Pengji snorted coldly and said, "Wake him up." The advisor's shoulders were held by someone and he could not move. He secretly glanced at Jiang Pengji, but his vision was dim. She was covered in blood from head to toe, and he could not knock her out. Although he could not see it, he could feel the terrifying aura that lingered around her. Even the king of the northern borderline did not have such an aura. When the soldiers came forward with a torch, the advisor tried his best to blink and stretch his neck to look at Jiang Pengji. Suddenly, Jiang Pengji turned her head and glared at him. Her eyes were full of intimidation. The advisor was so scared that he retracted his neck, lowered his head, and shrunk his shoulders. He did not dare to make a sound. On the other side, the soldiers followed Jiang Pengji's instructions and forcefully woke the second prince up. When he woke up, he was surrounded by a circle of people. These people were dressed very strangely, and the leader looked at him coldly as if he was looking at a dead man. The second prince suddenly shivered. He accidentally injured 2 arrow wounds. The pain made him want to faint.
I said. Jiang Pengji panted heavily and took 2 steps forward to the side of the second prince.
Chapter 949. When the second prince heard this, he shivered and almost forgot the pain in his body. He stared at Zhang Pengji and said fiercely, "The winner takes it all. What's there to talk about?" Hee hee. The winner takes it all? That's nice to hear. Zhang Pengji lifted her foot and kicked his face to the side. It didn't take long for it to swell. The advisor's eyes widened. He looked at Zhang Pengji and then at the second prince. After all, the second prince was the prince of the northern borderline. His identity had important political and strategic significance. Even if Zhang Pengji captured him, she should treat him well, not to mention humiliating him. Zhang Pengji could use this person to exchange for a lot of strategic resources from the northern borderline. It wasn't that she didn't understand this principle, but she still did it. Was this considered humiliation? If she didn't care about his worthless life, that kick would have sent his head flying. How could it just be a swollen face? Lu Shi. There's a saying in the Central Plains that goes like this: "You can kill me or cut me up, but you can't humiliate me." The second prince was tough for once. As the prince of the northern borderline, he was the most promising candidate for the throne. When had he ever been humiliated like this? Of course not. I'm going to step on you and humiliate you. What can you do to me? Zhang Pengji lifted her foot and stepped on his face so that he couldn't get up. She used a little strength and forced half of his face into the ground. The second prince was furious. The advisor was quiet. The audience in the streaming room didn't even dare to breathe. Through the screen, they could feel the anger in Zhang Pengji. It was like an active volcano that had been suppressed for a long time. Maybe in the next moment, the eruption of magma could bring about a scene of doomsday. The streamer had always been good-tempered. Why was she suddenly so violent? The audience was puzzled, but they believed that Zhang Pengji must have a reason for doing so. In fact, it was true. As mentioned earlier, Zhang Pengji had excellent night vision. With the help of the camera in the streaming room, the surrounding scene was as bright as day. In this way, she could clearly see the string of heads strung on the second prince's saddle. Sacrifices were inevitable in war. Zhang Pengji arranged for those people to guard the Chao Wu granary. She knew that the risk factor they faced was extremely high. It was very likely that they would all be wiped out. She had seen through life and death in her previous life. As long as it was a war, there would always be sacrifices. Even if it wasn't this person, it would be someone else, or even herself. The death of the soldiers could not trigger her anger, but she could not tolerate the act of humiliating the remains of the soldiers. "I said, I'll break your legs. I meant what I said." Half of the second prince's face hurt, and the pain affected his hearing, so he did not hear what the man had said. The advisor's scalp went numb as he listened. He watched helplessly as Zhang Pengji took 2 steps back and raised her foot to step on his knee. He exerted force with his right foot and crushed the ground with the tip of his toe. Zhang Pengji did not use much strength, but the second prince's knee made a bone-cracking sound. The second prince was in so much pain that his entire body was convulsing, and he screamed incessantly. His shrill screams made everyone present tense up, and they felt a chill run down their spines. After letting out a shrill scream, the second prince fainted with a pale face. Everyone who witnessed this shuddered in fear. However, there were also some thick-skinned audience members who ridiculed him. Kumo lemon juice. How is this breaking his legs? This is clearly breaking his kneecaps while he's still alive. Zhang Pengji released her foot and said to the person beside her, "Take him away. Send someone to take good care of his wounds. Don't let him die." The advisor heaved a long sigh of relief when he heard this. It seemed that Lu Shi was ruthless, but she was still rational. Little did he know that Zhang Pengji did not kill him on the spot because she wanted him to die more miserably. "My lord." Li Yun led a group of soldiers and horses to catch up. He was slightly injured, but his face was still rosy and he was in high spirits. "The person has been caught. Clean up the battlefield," Zhang Pengji said coldly. "Rest and reorganize. The army will set off tomorrow morning." Li Yun said, "This general obeys." "I hope Zheng Tu's side does not disappoint." She was a little irritable. If Fu Wang failed to take down the 3 cities, or if the losses from taking down the 3 cities exceeded expectations, she would be furious. Li Yun said calmly, "My lord, please rest assured. General Fu will definitely bring you good news." No matter what, Fu Wang was once the #1 general under the Mengs. Taking down cities was not a problem.
Oh, I hope so.
If Fu Wang could not take down the 3 empty cities where most of his troops had been transferred, he would not live up to his reputation. The advisor had not been taken away yet. He faintly heard the conversation between Jiang Pengji and Li Yun. His heart skipped a beat.
He suddenly remembered that the second prince had rushed over to steal the grain and transferred away most of the garrison.
Without sufficient garrison, how could the 3 cities of Xiongyu resist Lu Shi's well-prepared army? Lu Shi had taken down the 3 cities as easily as taking something out of his pocket. Thinking of this, the advisor regretted it so much that his intestines turned green.
From the moment the second prince obtained the distribution map of the granaries to the current defeat, it was clearly a meticulous scheme by the other party.
On the other hand, Fu Wang's performance did not disappoint his illustrious reputation. His fighting spirit was high. Within 2 days, he had taken down the 3 cities consecutively. He was invincible. Without spending much effort, he had taken back the 3 cities that the people of Dongqing had yearned for a long time. A flag with the word Lu was raised on the city walls. When Jiang Pengji arrived, Fu Wang was sending people to clean up the battlefield and retrieve the corpses of the sacrificed soldiers. "Greetings, my lord. Fortunately, I did not fail you." Strictly speaking, this was Fu Wang's first battle after joining Jiang Pengji's camp. If Fu Wang's performance was not outstanding enough, it would more or less affect his prestige in the army. "Thank you for your hard work." Jiang Pengji stood on the city walls and looked into the distance. Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile. The 3 cities of Xiongyu were located at the border between the northern borderline and Dongqing. Their city walls were tall, wide, thick, and hard. It was like a natural moat guarding the area. The 3 cities were built along the mountain range and relied on the natural barrier. Past this mountain range was the territory of the northern borderline. The northern borderline occupied the 3 cities. Without the mountain range as a hindrance, they could use the 3 cities as a base to attack Dongqing. It was precisely because of this that Dongqing had been so afraid of the northern borderline all these years. Now that the 3 cities were in Jiang Pengji's hands, the situation was completely reversed. Sun Wen had once fooled the 4th prince by saying that the construction of the 3 cities would slow down Jiang Pengji's progress in the north. There was nothing wrong with this sentence. The mistake was that Jiang Pengji had no intention of rebuilding the 3 cities. She was already preparing to attack the northern borderline. The 3 cities of Xiongyu were the center of the war. Was there any point in developing this place? From the beginning, Jiang Pengji had planned to build the 3 cities of Xiongyu into strategic military locations. She would use them as a springboard to attack the northern borderline. The basic construction of the 3 cities of Xiongyu was still there. With a little modification, they could be put into use to defend against strong enemies. Jiang Pengji said to Fu Wang, "Increase the number of troops to guard the 3 cities. The border guards of the northern borderline should have reacted by now." However, even if they reacted, it would be too late. Chapter 950. The second prince was afraid that others would find out about his plan to steal the grain and steal his credit, so he guarded against others like a thief. He volunteered to guard the 3 cities of Xiongyu, and found an excuse to dismiss the former garrison general. Because of this, the border guards of Northern Territory hadn't received any news about Fu Wang conquering the 3 cities of Xiongyu. By the time they received the news, Jiang Pengji and Li Yun had already brought reinforcements to reinforce the 3 cities of Xiongyu. Relying on the sturdiness of the city walls and a large number of defensive weapons, they defended the 3 cities with all their might. The soldiers of the northern borderline did not have enough logistical reserves. If the 2 sides confronted each other, the northern borderline would definitely give in and retreat. Jiang Pengji looked at the densely packed enemy troops below the city walls. Her ears were filled with their curses and vulgarities. "Your Highness, why don't you let me lead the troops to face the enemy and teach them a lesson?" "Hanmei, stay calm."
Qiguan Rang glanced at his lord's cold face and tugged at Li Yun's armor in a low voice to prevent this fellow from acting on impulse.
"Counselor, how can we endure this? These northern borderline barbarians are scolding." Li Yun swallowed the rest of his words, but his expression was still filled with rage. "The Lord has her own decisions. Do you think she likes to suffer losses?"
Qiguan Rang advised in a low voice.
"Why are the people outside cursing her so harshly? Isn't it just to provoke us into sending troops to meet the enemy? It won't do us any good to send troops now.
As the 3 cities of Xiangyu had just been conquered, most of the people living in these cities were people who were close to the northern region. If they take advantage of the time we are facing the enemy and secretly attack us from the inside, we might lose the 3 cities that we have plotted with great difficulty.
Let them shout and curse. They won't be able to hold on for more than a few days and will withdraw on their own. Li Yun was no longer the youngster from before. Of course, he could see the battle situation clearly. However, listen to the content of the curses outside. Insulting them for being cowards was one thing. This kind of insignificant scolding was nothing. Flirting with their lord, making all kinds of dirty jokes and dirty words, and even bringing in the lord's maternal relatives. This was too despicable. If we allow them to continue insulting us, where will our lord's dignity be? Li Yun was so angry that his eyes widened. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his weapon tightly. Even the good-tempered little angel couldn't stand it anymore. The person these people from the northern borderline were insulting was their lord. Even if it was just verbal obscenities, if word got out, what would happen to the lord's reputation? Everyone understands this, but if the lord doesn't say anything, what can we do? Xueqi gripped the handle of his fan tightly. He looked calm and composed, but his anxious action of fanning revealed his true emotions. Xueqi and the others were not the only ones who could not take it anymore. The viewers in the live streaming room were also anxious. They wanted nothing more than to rush into the screen and argue with the soldiers of the northern borderline. Holius H*T. Was their family's little princess someone anyone could insult? Believe it or not, they will use Hua Nation's language to scold these bastards of the Beijiang to death. When it came to the essence of scolding people, how could these uncivilized barbarians of the northern borderline be their opponents? Lao Ciji Lianming. Streamer, they're cursing so harshly. It's not like you to continue tolerating it. What kind of anchors should they know? There was nothing to lose. They had to admit that they understood Jiang Pengji quite well. What's the rush? I'm the one being scolded, but I'm not worried at all. Jiang Pengji smiled and comforted Li Yun. Her mental fortitude was far stronger than everyone imagined. It was just verbal abuse. It was not enough to make her lose her mind. To deal with such despicable people, we can only use more despicable methods. But shrews scolding each other is bad for manners. We can't do that.
She muttered to Fu Wang, who was standing silently by the side.
Zhang Tu, I have something for you to do. Fu Wang's heart skipped a beat. He moved forward to listen to Jiang Pengji's instructions and sighed with emotion. They were indeed despicable.
After a quarter of an hour, the soldiers of the northern borderline scolded until their mouths were dry, but the guards on the city wall still did not move.
The general of the northern borderline sneered and said sarcastically, "Is this Lu Shi a man or a woman? He doesn't even respond to our scolding?" The people of the northern borderline scolded Jiang Pengji the same way the shrews in the marketplace scolded the prostitutes. Any woman would have jumped off a building in anger after being scolded by thousands of people. Lu Shi was thick-skinned. Maybe he's enjoying it and thinks we're not doing enough. The deputy general had a meaningful look on his face. That's true. Continue scolding, don't stop. As soon as he finished speaking, a few people emerged from the quiet city wall. Hey, it's working. Don't stop, continue. This Lu Shi is really strange. He won't come out until we're scolding him. Ha ha ha. The soldiers of the northern borderline beside them also roared with laughter. But soon, they could not laugh anymore.
A few ladders extended from the battlements of the city wall, and a few men who had been stripped naked were tied up and hung out.
When the wind blew, a few men floated in the air. Behind them, there were rows of northern borderline captives who had been stripped naked, shivering in fear. Damn! What the hell was Lu Shi doing? You're afraid now? Who asked these barbarians to be so despicable? We have no choice. Fu Wang used the handle of his spear to poke the waist of the second prince's advisor. His clothes were intact, but he was also tied up like a dumpling. He was in a sorry state. The advisor's eye bags were bruised, and his cracked and dry lips looked pale. He was like a bird frightened by the mere twang of a bough. When Fu Wang poked him, his legs went soft and he almost collapsed to the ground. Fu Wang raised his eyebrows and laughed disdainfully. You're smart if you don't want to be stripped and hung up.
In order to survive, the advisor could only close his eyes in despair and shout at the bottom of the city wall at the top of his lungs.
I'm the advisor of the second prince. You've seen the prince. Hurry up and save him.
Fu Wang raised his hand to pick his ear and frowned.
I'm not shouting loudly enough. Continue.
The advisor's voice was already thin. Now that he forced himself to shout at the top of his lungs, his voice became hoarse after 2 shouts. Hearing that the person hanging on the city wall was the second prince of the northern borderline, the northern borderline soldiers below were in an uproar.
What are you panicking about? Lu Shi is lying to you. Continue scolding.
The general of the northern borderline shouted.
The soldiers quickly calmed down and continued to curse. The sparse curses became louder again.
Fu Wang, who was on the city wall, smiled as he knocked his bow and shot an arrow, breaking a hemp rope.
The person hanging on the hemp rope screamed and fell down, turning into a pool of flesh.
Hang him up, Fu Wang ordered coldly. The soldiers behind him tied up the naked northern borderline soldiers and hung them up the ladder that extended out of the wall back to the previous position.
Witnessing this scene with their own eyes, the people who were hanging earlier were so scared that they urinated and urinated. Filth dripped down from the air. The louder the cursing, the more Fu Wang did not stop. More than a dozen hemp ropes were broken in succession. All the people hanging fell to their deaths without exception. No one knew who Fu Wang would kill next. The advisor of the second prince was so scared that he almost collapsed. The second prince, who was hanging in the center near the city wall, screamed and kicked his feet. His face was covered with snot and tears. Chapter 951. The general guarding the northern borderline knew the second prince. Seeing this, his face was as black as the bottom of a pot. The northern borderline was used to playing rogue, but they didn't expect Lu Shi, who was born in a noble family, to be even more shameless than them. Not only did they strip the captives naked and hang them on the city wall, but they also used them as shooting targets.
If they were ordinary captives, it would be fine if a few died, but there was the second prince of the northern borderline among them.
A prince of a country was stripped naked and hung on the city wall by the enemy? How shameful and humiliating was that? Our Lord said that you northern borderline men are so courageous. Why do you need to stand in front of the battle and bark? Why don't you just attack the city to your heart's content and save your comrades? If you don't have the guts to attack, shut up.
Thanks to your second prince, we have at least 5,000 captives from the northern borderline here, if not 10,000.
No matter how long you curse, we will hang some and throw some. The besieging northern borderline general was so angry that he vomited blood. They didn't know whether to curse or not. If they cursed, the second prince might be the next one to be smashed into meat paste. If they didn't curse, why would he stay under the city wall with thousands of elites? Watching a few naked guys in the sky poop, vomit, and pee all over the place?
General, what should we do now?
The deputy general asked the chief general timidly. It was awkward for thousands of them to stay there without doing anything. The chief general was furious. He wanted to whip the deputy general who didn't know what to do. You ask me? Who should I ask? General, why don't we try to attack the city? Lu Shi has only occupied the 3 cities of Xiangyu for 2 days. His foundation is not stable. It's a good time to attack the city. Besides, the troops in the city may not be full. Maybe they are deliberately mystifying and trying to deceive us? Another deputy general was more cultured and spoke in a genteel manner. The Central Plains has a strategy called the empty city strategy. Maybe Lu Shi is using this strategy to deceive us. Now that the second prince is in their hands, if the humiliation today is spread, the northern borderline royal family will lose face. They insulted Jiang Pengji. The content of their insults were all vulgar words. There was no evidence at all, and outsiders would not believe it. But it was true that the second prince was hung on the city wall and humiliated. Thousands of eyes were watching. Who would be more shameful if word of this got out? The deputy general added, General, if we retreat without any movement, I'm afraid it'll be hard to explain to the king. This sentence was the last straw that broke the camel's back, forcing the commander to make up his mind. Okay, attack the city.
If the king of the northern borderline knew that he had retreated without even attacking the city, he was afraid that he would not be able to keep his life.
Stuck in a dilemma, he could only try his best. But, attacking the city with cavalry? Jiang Pengji sneered, this is probably the funniest joke I've heard this year. The advantages of cavalry were obvious, but the disadvantages were equally obvious. These people had rushed here in a hurry and did not bring enough siege weapons. The ancient city walls were tall and wide, and the cavalry's mobility advantage was completely useless. They did not have enough siege weapons, and their horses were not heavenly horses with wings. How could they break through the city walls? Jiang Pengji was not the only one who was clear about this. The people from the northern borderline were even clearer about it. They pretended to attack for a while, then left behind thousands of corpses and retreated dejectedly. The second prince, who was hanging on the city wall, could not even pee. Jiang Pengji glanced at him and said coldly, "They will come again tomorrow. Continue to hang these people, but remember not to kill them, especially the second prince. In the future, when we go to war with the northern borderline, I'm prepared to use his blood and head as a sacrifice. It'll be a pity if he dies." Fu Wang accepted the order. Yes. After Jiang Pengji left, Fu Wang sent someone to check the captives hanging on the ladder. The second prince was probably a cockroach. He had a strong vitality. He had 2 pierced wounds on his shoulders and broken kneecaps by Jiang Pengji, but such serious injuries did not kill him. He was still panting, his body trembling as he curled up. He looked very pitiful. The other captives did not have the courage to do so. A few of them were scared to death. Fu Wang waved his hand and ordered the soldiers to tie up the captives who were waiting in line and hang them up. Just as Qiguan Rang had predicted, the troops of the northern borderline did not have enough logistics. They could not keep up with the food supply, so they retreated after 2 days of siege. As they retreated, the news that the 3 cities of Shangyu had been reclaimed spread. The people in the north and south had different feelings. Master Yuan Jing stretched his back and sighed with a smile. If they don't fly for 3 years, they will grow wings. If they don't fly, they will not sing. If they don't fly, they will soar to the sky. If they don't sing, they will shock the world. This is the true meaning of, if they don't sing, they will shock the world with a single brilliant feat. Upon receiving the news, the forces in Wanzhou were jubilant. The people in Dongqing were even more jubilant. They were as happy as if they were celebrating the new year. The 3 cities of Shangyu had always been a fishbone in the hearts of the people of Dongqing. Unfortunately, the northern borderline was too powerful, so they could not reclaim it. But now, Jiang Pengji had reclaimed it. The people of the world began to take this female lord seriously. Dongqing. Zhangzhou. This is how a daughter should be. Father was right. Yang Tao put down the secret report. His expression became more solemn. He felt that the weight on his shoulders had increased by 2 notches. Not to mention other countries, Dongqing alone had so many strong opponents. He was afraid that he would fail his late father's expectations. The incident with Yang Jian had made him grow up a lot. The childishness of the past had been worn away, leaving only fortitude and maturity. However, faced with the situation of being besieged on all sides, he still felt a little lost. Yan Lin saw Yang Tao's emotions and comforted him. Don't belittle yourself. Zhengze is not bad either. Yes, companions are the best. Dongqing. Haozhou. Ha ha ha. I knew it. Lanting is indeed a rare, stalwart man in the world. Madam. When Huang Song received the news, he was having a private conversation with his wife. As soon as he finished lamenting, Lady Qi pinched the soft flesh on his waist. Lady Qi corrected him. She is a woman. What do you mean by saying that she is a man? Are you looking down on women? Huang Song was speechless. How had he offended Lady Qi? When Huang Song's capable strategist, Cheng Jing, heard the news, he tossed and turned all night, unable to sleep. Dongqing. Zhe County. Hu County. The Su and Pei brothers killed the former chief of Hu County Wuma Shang, while fighting amongst themselves. They peacefully divided up Wuma Shang's property and territory. Without the interference of external forces, they resumed their state of internal strife. Su Bei and Jiang Pengji called each other brothers. When he heard that she had reclaimed the 3 cities of Shangyu, he was happy for her from the bottom of his heart. It wasn't that Su Bei was righteous. It was simply because Jiang Pengji did not hinder his interests. With her standing guard in the north to resist the pressure from the northern borderline, he could not have asked for more. Su Bei smiled and sighed. Lanting actually has the ability to reclaim the 3 cities of Shangyu and truly make a name for himself. He really cannot be underestimated.
Beside him, a tall and slender strategist dressed in green said calmly, "This is a good opportunity for my lord."
Good opportunity? What does Wenbin mean? Chapter 952. Forming an alliance and borrowing power? Su Bei furrowed his brows in embarrassment. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult. She's already 19. She's a little old. Han Yu was startled. He looked at his lord's face and asked silently, "Where is your brain going? What does forming an alliance have to do with someone's age?" In the end, she was his lord. No matter how stupid she was, she had to give him face and not let him make a fool of himself. "It's okay," Han Yu said. Su Bei shook his head like a rattledrum. "That won't do. My eldest son is only 10 years old. I can't bear to push him into the fire pit." Han Yu was expressionless, but in fact, he was dumbfounded. Su Bei saw that Han Yu did not respond and thought that Han Yu was silently resisting. He said helplessly, "Wenbin, you can't possibly make me your lord go there personally. This won't do. Whether Lanting is willing to marry or not is another matter. Even if she is willing to marry, the first wife is still around and her subordinates are not willing." Since ancient times, the alliance had always used two methods. First, it was an exchange of benefits. Second, it was a marriage alliance. Most of the time, these two situations would complement each other and coexist. Although their relationship by marriage wasn't strong, it was better than not having this relationship to make him feel at ease. After Han Yu recovered from the shock, he calmed down and said helplessly, "I'm afraid my lord has misunderstood. I didn't mean that." This time, it was Su Bei's turn to feel awkward. But as a lord, which one of them was not thick-skinned? He quickly regained his composure, coughed twice and asked calmly, "Wenbin, tell us quickly, don't keep us in suspense." Han Yu said, "My lord has a good relationship with Lu Shi. Why don't you send someone to prepare a batch of provisions and send her a generous gift to congratulate her for taking down the 3 cities of Shangyu? My lord, you don't have to be afraid. You can directly describe the conflict between you and Second Master Su." After the beginning of spring, Lu Shi was bound to wage war with the northern borderline. One could imagine how much pressure he would be under. "We can't support her troops, but we can allocate some rations to her." The territory under Su Bei's rule was one of the few fertile lands in Dongqing. The food was plentiful and there was no need to worry about food and drink. They were not short of food. Although Jiang Pengji had been farming for many years, the war consumed too much food. Once there was a shortage of food, they could only tighten their belts and fight. The gift was just an excuse. The real purpose was to hint to Jiang Pengji that the two families should form an alliance. She supported Su Bei, and Su Bei gave her rations. Both parties took what they needed. Not only that, but Su Bei could also gain a good reputation. Supporting Jiang Pengji was equivalent to contributing to the resistance against the foreign tribes. He didn't need to pay a single soldier. He only needed to contribute a bit of food and he would be able to benefit from it. Su Bei thought about it and nodded in agreement to Han Yu's suggestion. "Since that's the case, let's do as Wenbin says." Su Bei was very annoyed with that cousin of his. Unfortunately, the other party was always opposing him. It was infuriating. In terms of seniority, no matter what, he was more qualified to be the successor of the Su family. However, that old undying grandfather of his doted on his youngest son and grandson, oppressing him, the eldest son of the first wife, in every way. Their battle was already out in the open, and Su Bei had nowhere to retreat. If he could borrow Lu Shi's power and influence to suppress Su Fei, Su Bei would be more than willing. Nanxing Nation. Zhangzhou. As the saying goes, nothing in this world is difficult for those who set their minds to it. And Chui's persistent pestering finally moved Lu Zheng's heart. The feeling of having a strategist and not having one was really different. When he didn't have a strategist, he had to rely on himself. His internal affairs were a mess, and he didn't have anyone to help him strategize. With the help of a strategist, the organization was reinvigorated, and everything was arranged properly. Lu Zhang was deeply moved by Chui and came out of seclusion to assist him. In the first battle, he helped Chui conquer half of Zhangzhou, stabilizing his foundation. Now that more than a year had passed, Lu Zhang had successfully won over the hearts of Xueqi's subordinates and stabilized his position as the #1 strategist. It was a little embarrassing to say it, but there were no decent strategists under Xueqi's command, except for Lu Zhang himself. "Teacher, are you still not asleep?" The boy servant lit the lamp and added oil to it, making it easier for Lu Zhang to read. "Today's matter ends today. It's hard for me to sleep if I haven't finished it." Lu Zhang was dressed in plain pajamas with a large cloak draped over his shoulders. Half of his face flickered in the orange candlelight. The boy servant sighed. If he had known that Xueqi would be so tired, he wouldn't have persuaded his teacher to help Xueqi. "What are you reading, teacher?" The boy servant noticed that Lu Zhang had been looking at the secret report for a long time, not moving his eyes away. "A secret letter from Dongqing. The lost 3 cities of Shangyu have returned. Teacher should be very pleased." Lu Zhang smiled. There was still green stubble on the side of his lips, and his eyes were bruised and swollen. He looked a few years older than his actual age. The boy servant let out a short "ah" and asked, "Teacher, is what you said true?" Lu Zhang raised his hand and adjusted the cloak draped over his shoulders. "Of course it's true. Your teacher can't slack off either." Light another lamp. Although he said that he disliked Xueqi, Lu Zhang had been secretly observing him. Seeing that the successive setbacks had slowly worn away Xueqi's edges and arrogance, Lu Zhang reluctantly agreed to become an official. As soon as he became an official, he did everything he could to help Xueqi find a peaceful place to live. Half of Jiangzhou. Next, it was time to move steadily and further expand his power. Xueqi was good in every aspect, except for one thing that gave him a headache. His power was still too weak, and his personnel structure was seriously biased. If he couldn't find someone to share his workload, Lu Zhang suspected that he would overwork himself to death. "Vongzhou, Bianzhou. Little Emperor, you've gone too far. Why don't we just rebel against him?"
The man in the black robe slammed the short table heavily. The dull thud hit the hearts of the people present.
Ever since the death of the former Empress Du, the emperor had become more and more obsessed with women. He had no interest in court affairs, even allowing relatives and eunuchs to kill loyal subjects. The aristocratic families watched coldly from the sidelines. At first, those involved were mostly commoner families and had little to do with their interests. Who knew that after 2 or 3 years, the eunuchs and relatives had become so powerful that they could shake the country? The 2 great powers worked together to deal with the aristocratic families, and even plotted several court coups in an attempt to seize power from them. The Nye family of Bianzhou could be considered a first-rate aristocratic family in Zhongzhou. They had a long history and were naturally the first to bear the brunt. Their political enemies were closing in, but they couldn't keep retreating. What's there to rebel about? This isn't as simple as eating and drinking. There are many implications. We can't act recklessly. If we continue to endure, are we just going to let those rootless eunuchs and peasants bully us? The other party didn't say anything. After a while, "This matter still needs to be discussed with father and the elders. Second brother, don't act rashly." The man called second brother frowned and swallowed his anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "All right, I understand." Because of the incompetent ruler and the demon empress, there were more and more uprisings in Zhongzhou. Until the coup of the eunuchs and relatives conspiring to kill the aristocratic families was exposed, Zhongzhou was no longer a country. The nobles supported by the aristocratic families revolted. Chapter 953. The world situation was treacherous. Jiang Pengji didn't have the time to care about other families' affairs. She focused on guarding her own territory. After forcing the northern borderline soldiers to retreat, she ordered Fu Wang to hang the second prince on the city wall for 8 hours every day. The second prince hung a wooden plate around his neck with the words, "Prince of the Northern Borderline," written on it. Anyone who passed by the city gate could see the content on the wooden plate. She used this method to retaliate for the humiliation the Northern Borderline inflicted on Dongqing and Jiang Pengji. To prevent the second prince from freezing or dying of illness, Jiang Pengji prepared a doctor with excellent medical skills and enough clothes to keep him warm. "Don't worry, I will let you live well until the day I go to war." She felt that she had the potential to be a vicious supporting female character. The second prince struggled and cursed her in a hoarse voice. "Lu Shi, how dare you treat me like this?
When the northern borderline army arrives, you will die a horrible death.
I don't know if I will die a horrible death, but you will definitely die a horrible death. If you have the guts, bite your tongue and commit suicide.
Looking at the second prince's frightened eyes, he was the living embodiment of a male protagonist who was bullied by a vicious supporting female character.
Zhang Pengji's heart was filled with malice. Bah! She couldn't be led astray by the streamer. For some reason, the streamer liked to pair up the scholars and generals under Zhang Pengji. He even wrote a lot of flirtatious jokes. She was bored and watched to kill time. The more she watched, the worse it got. She felt like she was poisoned. Every time she saw Fu Wang, Li Yun, Qi Guanrang, or Feng Zhan come closer, the jokes from the audience automatically appeared in her mind. The adults didn't escape. Even Feng Yi and Chongqing, who were far away in Wanzhou, were not spared. However, Host V, don't make up stories about Zixiao. Do whatever you want. Look, she's a good lord who loves her subordinates. Zhang Pengji couldn't help but give herself a thumbs up. The streaming room was jubilant and relaxed, but reality was not optimistic.
When the northern borderline received news of the second prince being captured and humiliated, the king was furious and the imperial court was shaken.
I don't have such an unfilial son. Get lost. Do you really think I don't know that all of you are coveting my throne? Upon receiving the news, the king of the northern borderline was so angry that he fainted. He seemed to have aged a few years after he woke up. Looking at his son who was surrounding his bed, he was so angry that his fingers were trembling.
He thought that the reason why the second prince volunteered to guard the 3 cities of Shangyu was because of his filial piety, but he never thought that this unfilial son had other plans.
You all want to die alone, don't you?
He had never expected that his second son would be able to raise an army of 20,000 right under his nose.
If his second son hadn't been so greedy as to steal Lu Shi's granary and turned around to force him to abdicate, wouldn't he have been dead by now? As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, he could not help but start a series of conspiracy theories. At this moment, he was not sad that his son had fallen into the hands of the enemy and suffered inhumane treatment. Instead, he was secretly happy. His second son, who wielded 20,000 troops, was simply a thorn in his side. Now that it had been removed, he felt much better. The king of the northern borderline took the opportunity to harshly beat his remaining 8 sons. After a few violent bouts of illness, his body was on the verge of collapse. The second prince's actions this time crossed the line. The king of the northern borderline was terrified and guarded against his sons as if they were thieves. Royal father, I don't dare. Please don't be angry and take care of yourself. The princes fought to be the first to express their opinions, their faces full of fear. Their acting skills were superb. It would be a waste if they were not given an Oscar.
Faced with the king of the northern borderline's harsh words, it did not matter what the other princes thought, but they had to put on the appearance of filial piety.
The 4th prince was scolded harshly, but he was secretly overjoyed.
It was all because of him that the second prince had fallen to such a state. He knew that the second prince had a lot of private soldiers, but he did not expect it to be to this extent.
A total of 20,000 elites. If the other party directly forced him to abdicate, the throne would definitely belong to him. How could he even have a chance? Mr. Sun, you have a divine foresight. You have calculated every possibility. You are really the reincarnation of Prime Minister Huangfu. Prime Minister Huangfu of the Xia dynasty had destroyed the Chenggu tribe's ambition to rule the Central Plains. To them, Prime Minister Huangfu was the most intelligent person. The 4th prince compared Sun Wen to him, which showed how much he admired him.
Your Highness, you flatter me.
Although he was speaking modestly, Sun Wen actually accepted the 4th prince's bow. The 4th prince said, Sir, although the second prince has been eliminated, there are still others eyeing him. Sir, you have to help me. Don't worry, Your Highness. I have a plan to eliminate the 1st prince. The 4th prince suddenly thought of the trick that Sun Wen asked him to do. He asked the 1st prince's men to kill the 2nd prince's patrolling soldiers, which led to the 2nd prince's radical attack on the granary.
If they were to frame him, sir, you mean? Sun Wen said with a smile. Although they are the 2nd prince's private soldiers, they are still the elites of the northern borderline.
Now, they have been swallowed by Lu Shi without saying a word. Not only did it damage the northern borderline's reputation,
but it also greatly damaged the morale of the northern borderline and weakened their armed forces. When the king's anger subsides, he will be distressed by the loss of 20,000.
Your Highness, why don't you choose a good time to mention this matter?
If the king knew that the first prince is an insider and has been secretly harming the other princes, I don't know how sad and disappointed he would be.
The fourth prince's heart skipped a beat and a fierce look flashed across his eyes.
Sir, you are right. Without the second prince, there was still the first prince of noble birth. As long as the first prince was eliminated, it would be much easier to deal with the other brothers.
Under Sun Wen's instigation, the princes of the northern borderline fought fiercely. A month later, the king of the northern borderline fainted from anger again. The first prince was stunned by the flying pot. Even if he opened his mouth wide, he could not defend himself. The king of the northern borderline was already on guard against his sons. He simply took the opportunity to cripple his eldest son. In just 2 months, his eldest son was crippled, and his second son was crippled by Zhang Pengji. Before he could catch his breath, he appointed Wu Liba, the wise man of the northern borderline, as an envoy to Dongqing. It seemed like he wanted an explanation, but in fact, it was for an alliance and reconciliation. The current northern borderline could not withstand a large-scale war. He had to think of a way to scare Zhang Pengji so that she would not dare to send troops to the northern borderline. As long as these 2 years passed and the northern borderline recovered a little, he could find Zhang Pengji to settle this blood debt. He had crippled one of his sons and killed 20,000 of his elites. Lu Shi must pay with his blood. Wu Liba carried a heavy responsibility and planned to use his glib tongue to persuade Zhang Pengji. Oh, a gift from the magistrate of Liuzhou? In order to regain the trust of the king of the northern borderline, Wu Liba took the initiative to undertake the heavy responsibility of being an envoy. Along the way, he made various assumptions and countermeasures. Chapter 954. My lord, even if we want to go to war with the northern borderline, it can't be now. Knowing what Zhang Pengji had given Wu Liba, Qiguan Rang almost broke his precious fan. Wenjing, what are you afraid of?
The northern borderline is the one who doesn't want war now.
The initiative is with us, and it's not up to them to decide. If Wu Liba can't take it anymore, he can just turn around and leave. Feng Zhen didn't mind blowing things up.
He grinned and gulped down a mouthful of sake.
His salary wasn't low. What kind of good wine couldn't he buy? However, Feng Zhen liked to freeload a little from each house. Even if it was unadulterated wine, he enjoyed it. Among all the houses, he liked his lord's wine the most. It tasted more mellow than ordinary liquors. Qiguan Rang glared at Feng Zhen. He was right.
It must be this wastrel who instigated his lord to cause trouble.
Feng Zhen received Qiguan Rang's gaze and secretly shrugged. He smiled, revealing his white teeth.
He had an expression that said, "What can you do to me?"
How could Qiguan Rang not know what kind of person his lord was? His lord was a troublemaker. She couldn't settle down, so why would she need others to instigate her to cause trouble? At most he gave some suggestions. He could only be considered an accomplice. Zhang Pengji also helped Feng Zhen. She said, "They've been bullied by the northern borderline. They're just taking the opportunity to get back at them. Even if I give them 8 or 10, they'll still have to endure it, not to mention one. Wenjing, do you think the wise man from the northern borderline can guess the meaning behind it?" With his lord's support, Feng Zhen proudly puffed out his chest. Qiguan Rang was so angry that his molars were itching. It was one thing to instigate his lord to stir up trouble, but this wastrel was being arrogant? Qiguan Rang's expression was gloomy. The audience laughed and made up stories about the two of them. Zhang Pengji was overjoyed. She secretly laughed until her stomach hurt. On the other side, Wu Liba couldn't laugh anymore. A gift from the governor of Liuzhou? When Wu Liba heard the news, he changed his mind. He was sure that Zhang Pengji had admitted defeat. She was using a gift to express her kindness. Wu Liba didn't show it on his face, but he smiled in his heart. He said, "Quickly present the gift." The gift was placed in a delicately shaped wooden box. There were exquisite and beautiful patterns around the box. It looked like a work of art. Seeing this, Wu Liba felt even more assured. He personally opened the box, and as soon as he lifted it a little, he smelled the stench of blood and decay. Wu Liba's expression changed. When he opened the lid and saw what was inside, his face turned ashen. Inside the mirror box was a set of exquisite glass headgear and a transparent bowl. Inside the bowl was a piece of rotten meat covered in coagulated blood.
If it was a few years ago, such a set of glass headwear could be sold at the high price of hundreds of thousands of strings of coins in the northern borderline.
Now it was so widespread and cheap that one set was not enough. With Wu Liba's knowledge, the piece of meat in the transparent bowl was clearly a human tongue. Wu Liba was praised as the sage of the northern borderline. Naturally, there was nothing to criticize about his intelligence. In an instant, he understood the meaning of the brocade box. Glass headwear? Everyone in the northern borderline knew that Wu Liba's wife was the young mistress of the northern borderline trading company. She loved to chase after luxury goods. A few years ago, when the colored glass of the heavenly palace appeared out of nowhere, Wu Liba's wife bought more than 10 sets. This act was talked about by the rich ladies of the northern borderline. Everyone thought that the colored glass of the heavenly palace was really expensive, but they didn't know that it was a scam. The Northern Borderline Trading Company Alliance and the rich ladies of the northern borderline were cheated of more than 20 million strings of coins by Xueqi. Among them, Wu Liba's wife's family was the leader of the trading company. Because of this, they were unable to recover. Wu Liba lost the support of the Yu family, and his position in the northern borderline was greatly affected. Even Wu Liba's political enemy, Harun Cha, often used this to mock him. The dignified sage of the northern borderline was schemed against by a businessman. Wouldn't he laugh his head off? Therefore, the colored glass of the heavenly palace had always been an indescribable pain in Wu Liba's heart. He hated to see this deceitful thing. As for the tongue, if a person's tongue was cut off, they couldn't speak. Wu Liba's visit to Dongqing was just to talk. Now, he was hinting to him not to talk. Wasn't this a slap in the face? Of course, this was not the end. Lu Shi, I will return the humiliation you have suffered today double in the future, Wu Liba said with a serious expression. He waved his hand. Take it out and throw it away. Wu Liba suppressed his anger.
Just as he was about to calm the raging flames in his heart, he suddenly saw something else in the brocade box from the corner of his eye.
Wait! Come back! He used his fingers to pick up the piece of paper that was pressed under the tongue and carefully unfolded it.
After reading it, his anger surged and his vision flickered.
I think your Prince Era is too noisy, so I specially sent it back, Lu Shi. This tongue actually belonged to the second prince. Wu Liba didn't have the time to care about the title, Prince Era. He only wanted to know who the owner of this tongue was. Lu Shi. Lu Shi. How dare you humiliate us like this? Wu Liba was so angry that his blood pressure soared. His cheeks were flushed red, then suddenly turned purple. Fortunately, Wu Liba's psychological endurance was strong. His vision flickered for a while and he actually recovered.
Guards! Wu Liba panted heavily.
His eyes were terrifyingly bloodshot. According to my orders, send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it back to Magistrate Liu. This fulfills the Central Plains custom of courtesy demands reciprocity. If it wasn't for the bigger picture, Wu Liba also wanted to use disgusting methods to disgust Jiang Pengji. However, as Feng Zhan had said, the main battle power was in Jiang Pengji's hands. The northern borderline had to serve them well. It wasn't that the northern borderline couldn't afford to fight, but the price of starting a war now was too high. Jiang Pengji received the generous gift from Wu Liba. She smiled and squinted her eyes. She liked it when her enemies couldn't do anything to her. In the end, they still had to flatter her, indulge her, and tolerate her. Lao Siji Lianming. Sigh. The northern borderline is so unlucky. Why did they have to meet the streamer? Xueqi Guofengxiu. If this was in a novel, the streamer would definitely be the top villain boss? Pia Pia Weong. That's really hopeless. How big does the halo of the main character have to be? How strong does the immortal body have to be to defeat the Demon King? Elon Yuge. The halo. It has to be at least 100 million in diameter, right? Poor Wu Liba. He doesn't have the halo of the main character, but he has taken on the task of defeating the Demon King. He's definitely going to be tortured. General Wu Liba, how have you been all these years since we parted ways in Shangjing? Jiang Pengji and Wu Liba had met once. At that time, he was high-spirited and arrogant. He forced Jiang Pengji to swallow the resentment in her heart. Now, the situation was reversed. She, who was dressed in white, had become a vassal who ruled over a region. The domineering and arrogant Wu Liba had to respect her mood and carefully flatter her. Indeed, the wheel of fortune had turned. A trace of astonishment flashed in Wu Liba's eyes. He was shocked by Jiang Pengji's familiarity and even more surprised by her kindness. He had met Lu Shi before? Wu Liba couldn't remember the trivial matter from that time. Chapter 955. That year at Mount Ji's hot spring in Shangjing, Jiang Pengji stood up for Feng Jin, but Wu Liba stood up to stop her at the critical moment. However, with Jiang Pengji's bad temper, how could she let it go so easily? In front of Wu Liba, she chopped off the arm of the instigator from the northern borderline and slapped his face in front of everyone. Wu Liba might still remember the incident, but how could he remember that the arrogant youth was the current Jiang Pengji? He carefully considered Jiang Pengji's words and chose a vague answer. "I've been living well these past few years. Thank you for your concern, Governor Lu." Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "As long as you're doing well." She didn't dare to boast about other things, but when it came to holding grudges, if she was the second best, no one would dare to be the first. Back then, at Ji Shan's hot spring, Jiang Pengji wanted to press Wu Liba to the ground and give him a good beating. She wanted to punch his face. She had always remembered this debt. In the past, due to the circumstances, she could only watch as Wu Liba was arrogant and despotic. Now that the tables had turned, it was her turn to control the situation. Wu Liba saw that Jiang Pengji had a smile on her face and was concerned about his well-being. She did not seem to have any ill intentions. He was puzzled. He even doubted whether it was Jiang Pengji's own intention to give him a gift. Could it be that her subordinates had done it behind her back? If that was the case, it proved that Jiang Pengji's attitude towards the northern borderline was still neutral. There should be a possibility of persuasion. Thinking of this, Wu Liba secretly heaved a sigh of relief. The expression on his face also became lighter. As long as there was a chance, everything could be discussed. What he didn't know was that Jiang Pengji looked easy to talk to. But it was only because of her excellent acting skills. As the leader of a group of actresses, she must be the best of the best, the one who won all the Oscars. Wu Liba was organizing his thoughts when Jiang Pengji interrupted him warmly and invited him to have a meal together. Even if Wu Liba did not pay much attention to it, he knew that Wanzhou's gourmet house was famous for its delicacies. Gourmet house was established by Jiang Pengji. "As you wish." He swallowed the words he was about to say. When the delicacies were served, the aroma of the meat made him salivate, and his appetite was greatly stimulated. Just the smell alone was enough to stir one's appetite. General Wu Liba was born in the northern borderline and is a man of the grasslands. He should be used to eating horse meat, right? Jiang Pengji smiled and ordered someone to pour wine for him. Horse meat? Wu Liba took a bite. He did not know how the chef handled the meat, but it melted in his mouth, and the rich fragrance of the meat spread on the tip of his tongue. Even someone like Wu Liba, who did not care about his appetite, could not help but take a few more bites. "It's a rare delicacy. Governor Lu, you're the lucky one. I'm afraid I don't have the fortune to enjoy it." It was indeed delicious. The meat was chewy and juicy. Based on Wu Liba's experience, this horse meat was definitely from a high-quality horse. However, the stud farm in Dongqing was controlled by the Meng family in Songzhou. The master of the Meng family had also made it clear that he and Lu Shi had an irreconcilable feud. It was absolutely impossible for him to provide horses to Lu Shi. In other words, Lu Shi's horses were like gold ingots. Why would he slaughter them for food? In an instant, various thoughts flashed through his mind. For some reason, Wu Liba had an ominous feeling. "General Wu Liba, how does it taste?" Jiang Pengji asked him with a smile. Wu Liba said, "The meat is chewy and delicious. I'm afraid it's a good colt." Jiang Pengji replied readily, "That's natural. It's an excellent colt from the northern borderline. I was afraid that General Wu Liba would not be used to it, so I specially sent someone to the warhorse camp to slaughter an injured horse. Although it's an injured horse, it's healthy and has a good bloodline. It's also a good horse." She spoke naturally.
The more Wu Liba listened, the darker his face became. The fragrance of the meat in his mouth seemed to have become poisonous, making it hard for him to swallow. The war horse was brought by the second prince. She purposely slaughtered a good colt from the northern borderline to entertain him. His evil intentions were clear. A stern look flashed in Wu Liba's eyes, but it quickly disappeared. Zhang Pengji asked, "Why aren't you eating?" He replied, "I'm old and my teeth are loose. I'm afraid I can't eat much. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint Governor Lu's good intentions." Wu Liba put the food aside and sat upright. "I heard that my master's second son offended Governor Lu?" Zhang Pengji continued to smile. "Didn't you see General Wu Liba when he entered the city?" Wu Liba was surprised. He did not know what she meant. Zhang Pengji continued, "I forgot. With my memory, I'm always forgetful. In order to welcome General Wu Liba, I thought about it day and night, but I couldn't find a good gift. Considering that Prince Era missed his hometown, I allowed a part of his body to return. However, his injuries were severe. If his limbs were broken, he wouldn't live long, so I could only cut off his tongue. Prince Era's tongue was twisted a while ago. He's still recuperating, so I didn't hang him on the city wall to dry these few days." The second prince worked 8 hours a day. It was quite tiring. Now that the second prince's mouth was injured, Zhang Pengji naturally would not force him to work with his injuries. Wu Liba suddenly widened his eagle eyes. His eyes were filled with rage and ruthlessness. "Governor Lu." Zhang Pengji lifted her eyelids lazily and said, "Yes, I'm listening." Wu Liba said, "Governor Lu, do you really have to be so ruthless?" Zhang Pengji smiled. "Ruthless? I don't think it's ruthless. Your prince from the north borderline brought 20,000 to 30,000 troops to attack Chongzhou. He tried to steal rations and burn down the granaries. I would like to ask, is this not ruthless? Once the 3 granaries of Chao Wu, Lijiang, and Sangmo are destroyed, the 100,000 elites in Chongzhou will starve to death. To put it bluntly, your lord allows his son to fool around and doesn't teach him to not steal. Don't blame me for teaching him how to be a man. General Wu Liba, are you here to plead on his behalf? 100,000 elites? 3 granaries could feed 100,000 elite soldiers?" Wu Liba extracted important information from Zhang Pengji's words. His face turned ghastly pale. Zhang Pengji's words were not polite at all. After careful consideration, it was extremely frightening. It was a clear threat. Wu Liba's heart raced. His mind was full of thoughts, but he remained unmoved on the surface. "Governor Lu, you've misunderstood. When my lord learned of this, he was furious. The second prince privately recruited 20,000 troops and was suspected of having disloyal intentions. Speaking of which, Governor Lu's action helped my lord to clean up his mess and at the same time, prevented more conflicts." Wu Liba said calmly, "The north borderline and Dongqing are in-laws. The 2 countries coexist peacefully. The second prince tried to incite a war between the 2 countries. It was a move that hurt his heart. It is the second prince's good fortune that Governor Lu taught him a lesson. My lord sent me here, firstly to explain, and secondly for the people at the border. I didn't expect General Wu Liba to be such a righteous person." Wu Liba saw Zhang Pengji admit it shamelessly. He almost vomited blood. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.